The ancient Mediterranean was a world of empires and kingdoms, where mighty civilizations rose and fell, like waves upon distant shores. The Egyptians built their towering pyramids and ruled the Nile for millennia. The Greeks established their city-states and spread their culture across vast territories. The Romans conquered lands from Britain to Mesopotamia with their legendary legions. Yet there existed another people, one whose influence stretched far beyond their small coastal homeland, whose innovations would shape the very foundations of our modern world. These were the Phoenicians, a civilization that has remained frustratingly elusive to historians and the general public alike. Until relatively recent archaeological discoveries, the Phoenicians were known primarily through the writings of their contemporaries and rivals. Ancient Greek and Roman sources described them as master sailors and shrewd merchants, yet these accounts were often filtered through the lens of competition and cultural bias. The picture that emerged was incomplete, sometimes contradictory, and frequently overshadowed by the more dramatic narratives of military conquest that dominated classical historiography. However, decades of excavation and scholarly inquiry have gradually revealed a far more complex and fascinating civilization than previously imagined. What has become clear from archaeological evidence and modern research is that the Phoenicians developed one of the most sophisticated maritime cultures in human history. They established trade networks that spanned continents, founded colonies across the Mediterranean basin, and created innovations that would endure for thousands of years. Their merchants sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules into uncharted Atlantic waters. Their artisans produced goods coveted by kings and commoners alike, and their scribes developed a writing system that would become the ancestor of nearly every alphabet used today. The origins of Phoenician civilization stretch back into the mists of the Bronze Age, emerging from the broader Canaanite culture that flourished along the eastern Mediterranean coast. In order to understand this remarkable people and their enduring legacy, we must examine their society, their achievements, and their profound impact on the ancient world. We will explore the question that has intrigued scholars for generations. Who were the Phoenicians? The geographical setting of Phoenician civilization was both a blessing and a challenge that would fundamentally shape their entire cultural development. Along the narrow coastal strip of what we now know as Lebanon, with portions extending into modern Syria and Israel, lay a series of natural harbours protected by offshore islands and rocky promontories. This coastline, squeezed between the towering peaks of the Lebanon Mountains and the azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea, offered limited agricultural land but extraordinary maritime opportunities. The Lebanon Mountains, rising dramatically behind the coastal cities, were covered in dense forests of cedar, pine, and fir trees that would become legendary throughout the ancient world. These magnificent cedars in particular grew to enormous heights and possessed wood so durable and aromatic that it was prized above all others for construction and craftsmanship. The mountains also contained springs and rivers that provided fresh water to the coastal settlements, creating a stark contrast to the arid conditions found in many other parts of the ancient Near East. Between the mountains and the sea, the fertile coastal plain was narrow, rarely extending more than a few miles inland. This geographical constraint meant that the inhabitants could never support large populations through agriculture alone, unlike the great river valley civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Instead, they were compelled to lookaward for their survival seed prosperity, developing the maritime skills that would become their defining characteristic. The coastline itself was remarkably well suited to early navigation and harbour construction. Rocky headlands and natural islands provided protected anchorages where ships could shelter from storms and conduct trade safely. Many of these harbours were positioned at the mouths of rivers or streams, allowing access to inland resources while maintaining secure connections to maritime trade routes. This combination of natural harbours, mountain resources, and limited agricultural land created the perfect conditions for a civilization that would thrive on commerce and seafaring. Archaeological evidence suggests that permanent settlements began appearing along this coast as early as the 4th millennium BCE, with some sites showing continuous occupation for thousands of years. These early inhabitants were part of the broader Canaanite culture that populated much of the Levant during the Bronze Age. They shared linguistic and cultural traditions religious with their inland neighbours while developing their own distinctive maritime adaptations. The scholarly consensus places the emergence of distinctly Phoenician civilization around 1200 BCE, coinciding with the collapse of the great Bronze Age empires that had dominated the Eastern Mediterranean. This was not a sudden transformation, but rather a gradual evolution from earlier Canaanite roots. Recent genetic studies have confirmed substantial population continuity in the region, indicating that the Phoenicians were indeed the direct descendants of earlier Canaanite peoples rather than migrants from elsewhere. The term Phoenician itself presents an interesting historical puzzle. The people we call Phoenicians never used this name to describe themselves as a unified group. Instead, this designation comes from the ancient Greeks, who called them Phoinices, possibly derived from the word phoenix, meaning purple-red. This name likely referred to the famous purple dye that became one of their most valuable trade commodities, extracted from murex shells found along their shores. What the Phoenicians actually called themselves remains uncertain, though evidence suggests they may have used the ancient term Canaanite to describe their broader cultural identity. Each city maintained its own local identity and governance, and there is little evidence that they viewed themselves as members of a single, unified nation in the modern sense. This political fragmentation would prove to be both a strength and a weakness throughout their long history. The emergence of Phoenician civilization as a distinct cultural entity was closely tied to the catastrophic events of the late Bronze Age collapse, a period of widespread destruction and societal breakdown that affected most of the Eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE. The great powers that had dominated the region for centuries suddenly weakened or disappeared entirely. The Hittite Empire crumbled, Egyptian influence waned dramatically, and the Mycenaean Greeks saw their palace centres destroyed and abandoned. For reasons that scholars still debate, the coastal Canaanite cities that would become the heart of Phoenician civilization managed to survive this crisis with far less disruption than their neighbours. While inland areas experienced significant population decline and cultural discontinuity, the maritime centres maintained their urban character and continued their commercial activities. This resilience may have been due to their diversified economy, their strong maritime connections, or simply their geographical position away from the main routes of destruction. By 1150 BCE, as the dust settled from the Bronze Age collapse, the Phoenician cities found themselves in a dramatically changed world. The great empires that had once controlled international trade had either vanished or been severely weakened. Trade routes that had been dominated by powerful states were now open to enterprising merchants willing to take risks. Most importantly, there was a power vacuum in maritime commerce that the Phoenicians were uniquely positioned to fill. The political organization of Phoenician civilization reflected both their Canaanite heritage and their maritime focus. Rather than developing into a unified kingdom or empire, they remained organized as independent city-states, each governing its own territory and maintaining its own political institutions. This system, similar to that later adopted by the Greeks, provided both flexibility and resilience in the face of changing circumstances. Each Phoenician city-state was typically centered around a fortified urban core, often built on a defensible island or rocky peninsula that could be easily protected from land-based attacks. These cities controlled varying amounts of surrounding territory, including agricultural lands, quarries, and forest resources. The relationship between the urban centre and its hinterland was crucial for the city's survival and prosperity. The oldest and most established form of government in Phoenician cities was monarchy, with kings ruling over their respective domains. However, these were not absolute monarchs in the style of Egyptian pharaohs or Mesopotamian rulers. Instead, Phoenician kings operated within a complex web of relationships with powerful merchant families, religious authorities, and civic institutions that limited their power and influenced their decisions. Wealthy merchant families played a particularly important role in Phoenician politics and society. These families, enriched by successful trading ventures, often possessed resources that rivaled or exceeded those of the royal treasury. They could finance trading expeditions, maintain private fleets, and establish overseas connections that were crucial to their city's prosperity. In many cases, these merchant oligarchies effectively shared power with the monarchy, creating a unique form of governance that balanced royal authority with commercial interests. The three most important Phoenician cities that would dominate their civilization's development were Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre. Each of these cities had its own distinct character, specialties, and periods of prominence, yet all shared the common Phoenician focus on maritime trade and cultural exchange. Byblos stands as perhaps the most ancient of the major Phoenician centers, with archaeological evidence showing continuous occupation stretching back to the Neolithic period. Known to its inhabitants as Gubla, and later called Gebel in biblical sources, this city held a special place in Phoenician consciousness as a center of great antiquity and religious significance. According to Phoenician legend, Byblos was founded by the god El himself, marking it as a sacred site from its very origins. During the Bronze Age, Byblos had already established itself as a crucial link between the civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the broader Mediterranean world. The city became the primary terminus for trade routes carrying precious goods from as far away as Afghanistan, including the tin necessary for bronze production and the brilliant blue stone lapis lazuli prized by ancient craftsmen and royalty. Here at Obscure Histories, we've explored many civilizations that rose to prominence through military conquest or agricultural abundance, but Byblos achieved its status through something far more subtle, yet equally powerful: the control of information and communication. The city became the great exporter of papyrus, the writing material that would give us our modern word for book through the Greek term biblos, derived from the city's name. This connection between Byblos and the written word would prove prophetic, as the Phoenicians would later develop the alphabetic writing system that forms the foundation of our modern scripts. The city's role as a center for both writing materials and, eventually, writing systems themselves made it a crucial node in the networks of knowledge and culture that connected the ancient world. The relationship between Byblos and Egypt was particularly close during the Bronze Age, with Egyptian texts describing regular diplomatic and commercial exchanges between the two powers. Egyptian ships would arrive at Byblos loaded with gold, silver, and manufactured goods, departing with cedarwood, resin, and papyrus. This relationship was so important to Egypt that several pharaohs maintained permanent representatives in the city and even built temples there dedicated to Egyptian deities. During the turbulent centuries that followed the Bronze Age collapse, Byblos managed to maintain its commercial networks and cultural connections, even as other great centers crumbled around it. The city's merchants proved remarkably adaptable, shifting their focus from serving the needs of great empires to developing new markets among the emerging peoples and cultures of the Mediterranean world. This adaptability would become a hallmark of Phoenician civilization as a whole. The religious significance of Byblos extended far beyond its economic importance. The city served as a major cult center for several Canaanite deities who would later become central figures in the broader Phoenician pantheon. The goddess Balat Gebel, literally meaning Lady of Byblos, was venerated here as a protector of the city and patron of its maritime endeavors. Her temple complex, built on a prominent hill overlooking the harbor, dominated the city's skyline and served as both a religious center and a symbol of civic identity. Archaeological excavations at Byblos have revealed layer upon layer of continuous habitation, each telling the story of cultural adaptation and persistence through changing circumstances. Bronze Age palaces give way to Iron Age structures, which in turn are succeeded by later Persian and Hellenistic buildings. Yet the essential character of the city, as a maritime trading centre, remains constant throughout these transformations. Sidon emerged as another major Phoenician centre, built upon a rocky promontory that provided excellent natural defences and harbour facilities. Located approximately 25 miles south of modern Beirut, the city commanded a strategic position along the coastal trade routes, while maintaining access to the fertile agricultural lands of the interior. This combination of maritime and terrestrial advantages allowed Sidon to develop into one of the most prosperous and influential cities in the Phoenician world. The early prominence of Sidon is reflected in ancient literary sources, particularly in the works of Homer, who referred to all Phoenicians as Sidonians in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. This suggests that during the period Homer was describing, roughly the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, Sidon held a position of such prominence that its name had become synonymous with Phoenician civilization as a whole. Homer's descriptions of Sidonian craftsmen as well-skilled in deft handiwork and producers of silver bowls that were fairest in all the earth provide valuable insights into the city's reputation for artistic excellence. The industrial capabilities of Sidon were truly remarkable for the ancient world. The city became the primary centre for glass production in the Phoenician realm, with archaeological evidence suggesting that the technique of glass blowing may have been developed here during the 1st century BCE. The scale of glass production was enormous, with furnaces operating continuously and skilled craftsmen producing everything from simple vessels to elaborate decorative pieces that were traded throughout the Mediterranean. Even more famous than its glasswork was Sidon's production of purple dye, extracted from the murex shells that were abundant along the Phoenician coast. The process of dye production was both labour-intensive and highly specialised, requiring thousands of shells to produce even small quantities of the precious pigment. The shells had to be carefully broken open to extract the tiny amounts of dye-producing secretion, which would then undergo a complex process of fermentation and chemical treatment to achieve the brilliant purple colour that became the mark of royalty throughout the ancient world. The economic impact of this purple dye industry cannot be overstated. The dye was so valuable that it literally became worth its weight in silver, creating enormous wealth for the merchants and craftsmen who controlled its production. Textiles dyed with Sidonian purple were exported to every corner of the known world, adorning the robes of kings, priests, and wealthy nobles from Britain to Mesopotamia. The association between purple cloth and royal power became so strong that the colour itself became synonymous with imperial authority, a connection that persists in our language and culture to this day. The remains of Sidon's purple dye industry are still visible today in the form of massive shell mounds that accumulated over centuries of production. These heaps of discarded murex shells, some reaching heights of several meters, provide tangible evidence of the scale and duration of this crucial industry. Archaeological analysis of these deposits has revealed not only the techniques used in dye production, but also valuable information about ancient trade patterns and economic relationships. As Sidon flourished during the early Iron Age, it established numerous colonies and trading posts throughout the Mediterranean, spreading Phoenician culture and commercial practices far beyond their homeland. These colonial foundations would later prove crucial to the survival of Phoenician civilization when the homeland came under pressure from expanding empires in the east. However, the supremacy of Sidon was not destined to last forever. By the 1st century BCE, another Phoenician city had begun to eclipse Sidon's power and influence through even more ambitious maritime ventures and commercial innovations. This rising power was Tyre, located some 60 miles south of Beirut on what was originally a rocky island just offshore from the mainland. Tyre possessed all the advantages that had made other Phoenician cities successful, but in even more concentrated form. The island location provided exceptional natural defences, making the city virtually impregnable to land-based attacks. The surrounding waters offered excellent harbours on both the northern and southern sides of the island, allowing ships to find shelter regardless of wind conditions. Most importantly, the city maintained easy access to the agricultural resources and forest products of the mainland, while remaining secure from the political upheavals that periodically swept across the region. The rise of Tyre to dominance within the Phoenician world was neither sudden nor accidental. The city's merchants and rulers demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt to changing circumstances and capitalize on new opportunities. During the period of recovery following the Bronze Age collapse, Tyre's leaders made a series of strategic decisions that would transform their city from a regional trading center into the hub of a Mediterranean-wide commercial empire. One of the most crucial of these decisions was the formation of a close alliance with the newly established Kingdom of Israel under Kings David and Solomon. This partnership, cemented through diplomatic marriages and commercial agreements, provided Tyre with access to overland trade routes leading to the Red Sea and beyond, while giving Israel access to Phoenician maritime expertise and Mediterranean markets. The biblical accounts of this relationship describe how Hiram, king of Tyre, provided cedar wood and skilled craftsmen for the construction of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, receiving in return agricultural products and territorial concessions. This alliance proved enormously profitable for both parties. Tyrian merchants could now participate in the lucrative trade with southern Arabia, East Africa, and potentially even India through Red Sea routes controlled by Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli products, particularly agricultural goods and minerals from the Dead Sea region, found new markets throughout the Mediterranean through Phoenician commercial networks. The partnership also involved joint maritime ventures, with Tyrian ships and navigators working alongside Israeli crews to establish trading posts in distant lands. The success of the Tyrian-Israeli alliance demonstrated the sophisticated diplomatic and commercial strategies that characterized Phoenician statecraft. Rather than relying solely on military conquest or territorial expansion, the Phoenicians preferred to establish mutually beneficial relationships that could provide long-term stability and prosperity. This approach required considerable skill in negotiation, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to maintain complex networks of relationships across vast distances. Under the leadership of successive kings, Tyre began to implement internal reforms that further enhanced its commercial capabilities. The traditional power of the priesthood was curtailed in favor of merchant interests, allowing for more efficient allocation of resources toward maritime ventures. The city's wealth was distributed more broadly among the citizenry, creating a larger class of investors who could finance trading expeditions and colonial foundations. The physical expansion of Tyre also reflected its growing ambitions. As the island city became increasingly crowded with commercial facilities and residential areas, the Tyrians began an ambitious project to expand their territory through land reclamation and construction. Harbours were enlarged and improved, warehouses were built to store goods from around the world, and residential districts were expanded to accommodate the growing population of merchants, craftsmen, and sailors who were drawn to the city's prosperity. The maritime technology developed by the Tyrians represented significant advances over earlier Phoenician practices. Their shipwrights designed vessels that were both larger and more seaworthy than their predecessors, capable of carrying greater cargo loads over longer distances. These ships incorporated innovations in hull design, sail configuration, and navigation equipment that made long-distance voyages safer and more profitable. Navigation techniques pioneered by Tyrian sailors would revolutionize Mediterranean commerce. They developed systematic methods for using celestial navigation, particularly the North Star, to maintain course during night sailing. This capability effectively doubled the amount of time ships could remain at sea, dramatically reducing voyage times and increasing the number of trading expeditions that could be completed in a single season. The expansion of Tyrian influence throughout the Mediterranean was achieved through a combination of trading posts, formal colonies, and strategic alliances with local populations. Unlike later Roman expansion, which relied primarily on military conquest and direct political control, The Tyrian approach emphasized commercial relationships and cultural exchange. This strategy proved remarkably effective in creating sustainable networks of influence that could adapt to changing political circumstances. By the 8th century BCE, Tyrian merchants had established permanent settlements across the Mediterranean, from Cyprus and Rhodes in the east to Sicily, Sardinia, and the Iberian Peninsula in the west. These foundations served multiple purposes. They provided secure bases for further exploration and trade. They facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas between different regions, and they created new markets for Phoenician products and services. Here at Obscure Histories, we've examined many ancient civilizations that achieved greatness through military prowess or political innovation. But the Tyrian approach to empire building was fundamentally different. Rather than imposing their will through force, they created networks of mutual dependence and shared prosperity that proved remarkably durable and adaptable to changing circumstances. The cultural impact of this Tyrian expansion extended far beyond mere commercial exchange. Wherever Phoenician merchants established themselves, they brought with them new technologies, artistic styles, religious practices, and most importantly, their revolutionary alphabetic writing system. This cultural transmission would prove to be one of their most enduring legacies, influencing the development of civilizations throughout the Mediterranean basin and beyond. The relationship between the three great Phoenician cities of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre was complex and ever-changing. While they shared common cultural traditions and often cooperated in commercial ventures, they also competed fiercely for markets and influence. This competition drove innovation and expansion as each city sought to develop new products, establish new trade routes, and found new colonies that would give them advantages over their rivals. The political dynamics between these cities also reflected broader patterns in Phoenician society. Alliances formed and dissolved based on commercial interests and external threats. During periods of foreign pressure, the cities would often unite in common defense, but in times of prosperity and security, competition and rivalry would reassert themselves. This pattern of cooperation and competition would characterize Phoenician civilization throughout its long history. The internal structure of Phoenician society reflected the unique demands of their maritime commercial culture. Unlike the rigid hierarchical systems that characterized many ancient civilizations, Phoenician society exhibited a remarkable degree of social mobility and economic opportunity. This flexibility was born of necessity, as successful maritime trade required individuals who could adapt quickly to changing circumstances, negotiate with diverse cultures, and manage complex financial arrangements across vast distances. At the apex of Phoenician society stood the merchant princes, wealthy families whose fortunes had been built through generations of successful trading ventures. These individuals commanded resources that often rivaled those of kings, maintaining private fleets, establishing overseas trading posts, and financing the colonial expeditions that expanded Phoenician influence throughout the Mediterranean. Their palatial homes, decorated with luxury goods from around the known world, served as both residences and commercial headquarters, where international deals were negotiated and maritime expeditions planned. The relationship between these merchant elites and the traditional monarchy varied significantly between cities and across different periods. In some cases, wealthy controlled merchant families effectively directed royal policy through their economic influence and political connections. Kings who ignored the interests of the commercial class often found themselves facing financial difficulties and potential rebellion. Conversely, monarchs who successfully balanced the competing interests of different merchant factions could harness enormous resources for public works, military campaigns, and territorial expansion. Beneath the merchant elite existed a substantial middle class of skilled craftsmen, shipbuilders, navigators, and specialized traders. These individuals possessed the technical knowledge and practical experience that made Phoenician commerce possible. Master shipwrights designed and constructed the vessels that carried Phoenician goods across the seas, while expert navigators developed the techniques and accumulated the geographical knowledge that made long-distance voyages profitable and relatively safe. The craft guilds that organized these skilled workers played crucial roles in maintaining quality standards and preserving technical knowledge. Apprenticeship systems ensured that complex skills were passed down from generation to generation, while guild regulations protected both producers and consumers from fraudulent or substandard products. The reputation of Phoenician goods for quality and reliability was largely maintained through these guild structures, which created standardized practices and enforced professional ethics. Religious authority in Phoenician society was intimately connected with commercial success and political power. Temples served not only as centers of worship, but also as economic institutions that provided banking services, stored valuable goods, and coordinated large-scale commercial ventures. The priests who administered these temples often possessed considerable wealth and political influence, making them important players in the complex networks of power that governed Phoenician cities. The integration of religious and commercial activities reflected the Phoenician understanding of divine favor as essential to business success. Merchants would make offerings to appropriate deities before embarking on trading voyages, while successful expeditions were celebrated with elaborate religious festivals that reinforced both community solidarity and divine gratitude. This religious dimension of commerce helped create shared cultural values that transcended individual city-states and contributed to a broader sense of Phoenician identity. Women in Phoenician society enjoyed considerably more freedom and economic opportunity than their counterparts in many civilizations. The demands contemporary of maritime trade, which often required extended absences by male family members, created opportunities for women to assume important roles in managing family businesses and commercial operations. Archaeological evidence suggests that some women achieved considerable wealth and status as independent traders, while others inherited and successfully managed substantial commercial enterprises. The worship of powerful female deities, particularly Astarte and Tanit, provided religious validation for women's economic activities and social prominence. These goddesses were associated with fertility, prosperity, and protection. Maritime adventurous figures, in both, making them central personal devotion and public religious life. The priestesses who served these deities often wielded considerable influence in community affairs and economic decision-making. Slavery existed in Phoenician society, but the institution operated somewhat differently than in purely agricultural civilizations. Many slaves were employed in commercial activities rather than agricultural labor, serving as crew members on trading vessels, assistants in craft workshops, or household servants in wealthy merchant families. The international nature of Phoenician commerce meant that slaves often came from diverse cultural backgrounds, creating complex social dynamics within Phoenician cities. Interestingly, the commercial focus of Phoenician civilization created opportunities for slaves to achieve freedom and even prosperity through their own trading activities. Skilled slaves who demonstrated business acumen might be granted increasing responsibility and eventually earn their freedom through successful commercial ventures. Some former slaves became successful merchants in their own right, contributing to the social mobility that characterized Phoenician society. The educational system that developed in Phoenician cities reflected their commercial priorities and international outlook. While literacy was certainly more widespread than in many ancient societies, education focused heavily on practical skills needed for successful trading activities. Young people learned mathematics for commercial calculations, geography for understanding trade routes and markets, and languages for communicating with diverse trading partners. The development of the Phoenician alphabet played a crucial role in expanding educational opportunities and democratizing access to written knowledge. Unlike the complex writing systems used by earlier civilizations, which required years of specialized training to master, the Phoenician alphabet could be learned relatively quickly by anyone with basic intelligence and motivation. This accessibility meant that literacy was no longer confined to a small priestly or scribal class, but could be acquired by merchants, craftsmen, and other members of the growing middle class. The economic foundations of Phoenician prosperity extended far beyond simple trade in luxury goods. While items like purple dye, fine textiles, and precious metals certainly generated substantial profits, the Phoenicians also developed sophisticated systems for bulk commodity trading that supplied the basic needs of Mediterranean populations. Grain shipments from fertile regions like Sicily and North Africa fed urban populations throughout the region, while timber from the Lebanese mountains provided construction materials for cities across the ancient world. Manufacturing activities in Phoenician cities achieved levels of specialization and technical sophistication that were remarkable for the ancient world. Glass production, pioneered in Sidon, involved complex chemical processes and specialized furnace technologies that required considerable scientific knowledge and technical skill. The glassworks employed hundreds of workers in various specialized roles, from furnace operators who maintained precise temperatures to skilled artisans who shaped molten glass into finished products. Metalworking represented another area of Phoenician technological advancement. Craftsmen developed innovative techniques for working with bronze, silver, gold, and eventually iron, creating both utilitarian objects and elaborate decorative pieces that were prized throughout the Mediterranean. The famous Phoenician bowls, decorated with intricate mythological scenes and geometric patterns, demonstrate the high level of artistic and technical achievement reached by these metalworkers. The textile industry, closely connected to the production of purple dye, involved complex processes that transformed raw materials into finished luxury goods. Phoenician weavers developed sophisticated techniques for creating fine fabrics, while dyers perfected methods for achieving consistent coloration and preventing fading. The reputation of Phoenician textiles for quality and beauty made them sought-after commodities in royal courts from Egypt to Mesopotamia. The agricultural base that supported Phoenician cities was necessarily limited by geographical constraints, but it was intensively cultivated and carefully managed to maximize productivity. Terraced hillsides extended cultivatable land beyond the narrow coastal plain, while sophisticated irrigation systems made efficient use of available water resources. The famous cedars of Lebanon were managed as a renewable resource, with careful harvesting practices designed to ensure continued availability of this valuable timber. Viticulture flourished in the favorable Mediterranean climate, producing wines that became renowned throughout the ancient world. Phoenician merchants established the reputation of Lebanese wines in markets from Egypt to Italy, creating one of the earliest examples of what we might recognize as brand recognition in international commerce. The wine trade also facilitated cultural exchange, as drinking customs and religious practices associated with wine consumption spread throughout Phoenician commercial networks. The development of sophisticated financial instruments and banking practices was essential to the functioning of Phoenician long-distance trade. Merchants needed reliable methods for transferring value across vast distances, managing credit relationships with foreign partners, and financing expensive trading expeditions that might not return profits for months or years. Phoenician innovations in these areas laid important groundwork for later developments in Mediterranean commercial practices. Letters of credit allowed merchants to conduct business in distant markets without physically transporting large quantities of precious metals or other valuables. Partnership agreements specified profit-sharing arrangements for joint ventures, while insurance concepts protected against the substantial and ancient risks in maritime commerce. These financial innovations require frameworks and enforcement sophisticated legal to the overall stability and mechanisms that contributed predictability of Phoenician commercial networks. The legal systems that governed Phoenician society priorities reflected their commercial and international outlook. Contract law was highly developed, providing detailed frameworks for regulating complex commercial relationships and resolving disputes between merchants from different cities or cultural backgrounds. Maritime law addressed the unique challenges of sea-based commerce, establishing principles for sharing risks and responsibilities among ship owners, cargo owners, and crew members. International law concepts emerged from the necessity of regulating trade relationships between different political entities. Phoenician cities negotiated commercial treaties with foreign powers, established diplomatic protocols for resolving disputes, and developed standardized practices for protecting merchants operating in foreign territories. These legal innovations would influence the development of international commerce throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The military capabilities were designed primarily of Phoenician cities to protect their commercial interests rather than to pursue territorial conquest. Naval forces focused on protecting merchant vessels from pirates and ensuring safe passage through contested waters. The famous Phoenician warships, with their bronze-reinforced rams and skilled crews, could engage enemy vessels effectively while also serving as escorts for merchant convoys. Land-based military forces were generally smaller and less emphasized than naval capabilities, reflecting the maritime focus of Phoenician civilization. However, these forces were well-equipped and professionally trained, capable of defending city walls and conducting limited offensive operations when necessary. The integration of foreign mercenaries into Phoenician military forces reflected both their international outlook and their preference for professional military service over citizen militias. The fortification systems that protected major Phoenician cities represented sophisticated approaches to defensive architecture. Island locations like Tyre provided natural advantages that were enhanced through careful engineering and construction. Harbours were protected by chains and artificial barriers, while city walls incorporated advanced features like overlapping fields of fire and multiple defensive lines that could slow attacking forces. The diplomatic strategies employed by Phoenician cities demonstrated remarkable sophistication in managing complex international relationships. Rather than relying solely on military strength or economic coercion, Phoenician diplomats cultivated networks of alliances and partnerships that provided mutual benefits to all parties involved. Marriage alliances, commercial treaties, and cultural exchanges created webs of relationships that helped maintain stability and prosperity across the Mediterranean region. Here at Obscure Histories, we have observed that many ancient civilizations achieved temporary dominance through military conquest, only to see their empires fragment when military pressure could no longer be sustained. The Phoenician approach of building relationships based on mutual economic benefit proved far more durable, creating networks of influence that could adapt to changing political circumstances while maintaining their essential commercial functions. The cultural influence of Phoenician civilization extended far beyond their immediate political control or commercial activities. Wherever Phoenician merchants established themselves, they introduced new technologies, artistic styles, and cultural practices that were adopted and adapted by local populations. This cultural transmission occurred through peaceful exchange rather than military conquest, making it more likely to be voluntarily adopted and successfully integrated into existing societies. Religious practices associated with Phoenician deities spread throughout the Mediterranean, often syncretizing with local religious traditions to create new hybrid forms of worship. The goddess Astarte became identified with Aphrodite in Greek contexts, while Melkart was associated with Hercules in Roman traditions. These religious connections helped create cultural bridges between different societies and facilitated ongoing commercial and diplomatic relationships. Artistic influences flowed in multiple directions through Phoenician commercial networks. Phoenician craftsmen incorporated design elements from Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and other artistic traditions into their own works, while simultaneously introducing distinctively Phoenician motifs and techniques to foreign markets. This artistic cross-pollination enriched the cultural life of societies throughout the Mediterranean and created shared aesthetic traditions that transcended political boundaries. The technological innovations pioneered by Phoenician craftsmen and merchants spread rapidly through their commercial networks, accelerating technological development throughout the region. Improvements in shipbuilding techniques, navigation methods, and manufacturing processes were quickly adopted by other societies, while foreign innovations were likewise incorporated into Phoenician practices. This technological exchange contributed to a general acceleration in the pace of innovation throughout the Mediterranean world. The linguistic impact of Phoenician civilization was perhaps even more profound than their technological contributions. The spread of the Phoenician alphabet through commercial networks provided the foundation for literacy in numerous societies that had previously lacked effective writing systems. This democratization of literacy had far-reaching social and cultural consequences, enabling the development of literature, philosophy, and record-keeping practices that would shape the intellectual development of Mediterranean civilizations. The adaptation of the Phoenician alphabet by different societies led to the development of distinct but related writing systems throughout the region. The Greek adoption of Phoenician letters, with the crucial addition of vowel symbols, created the direct ancestor of our modern Western alphabets. Meanwhile, other societies modified Phoenician letters to suit their own linguistic needs, creating the diverse family of alphabetic writing systems that characterizes much of the modern world. The intellectual foundations that supported Phoenician commercial success required sophisticated systems of knowledge preservation and transmission that went far beyond simple record-keeping. Phoenician merchants operating across vast distances needed detailed information about seasonal weather patterns, political conditions in distant markets, currency exchange rates, and the preferences of diverse customer bases. This practical knowledge was accumulated over generations and carefully preserved within merchant families and professional guilds. The development of standardized weights and measures across Phoenician commercial networks represented a crucial innovation that facilitated trade throughout the Mediterranean. Unlike earlier civilizations where measurement systems varied dramatically between regions, the Phoenicians established consistent standards that were recognized and accepted in markets from Spain to Cyprus. This standardization reduced transaction costs, minimized disputes, and created the predictable commercial environment necessary for large-scale international trade. Cartographic knowledge accumulated by Phoenician navigators represented one of their most valuable and closely guarded commercial assets. Detailed charts showing coastlines, harbors, seasonal wind patterns, and navigation hazards were compiled through centuries of maritime experience. These charts included information about local customs, political conditions, and commercial opportunities that was essential for successful trading expeditions. The accuracy and comprehensiveness of Phoenician geographical knowledge far exceeded that of their contemporaries and would not be matched again for centuries. The mathematical skills required for successful long-distance commerce drove important advances in numerical calculation and financial record-keeping. Phoenician merchants needed to perform complex calculations involving currency conversions, profit margins, shipping costs, and tax obligations across multiple political jurisdictions. The decimal system that emerged from these practical needs provided a foundation for mathematical development that would influence subsequent civilizations throughout the Mediterranean region. Commercial intelligence networks, developed by Phoenician traders, provided early warning systems for political upheavals, military conflicts, and economic disruptions that could affect trade routes and market conditions. Merchants maintained correspondence with business partners across the Mediterranean, creating informal but highly effective communication networks that transmitted information far more rapidly than official diplomatic channels. This intelligence capability gave Phoenician merchants significant advantages in anticipating market changes and avoiding dangerous situations. The seasonal rhythms that governed Mediterranean navigation created logistical challenges that required careful, complex log planning and coordination. Phoenician merchants had to synchronize their activities with weather patterns, agricultural cycles, and religious festivals that affected different regions at different times. The winter months, when storm conditions made sailing dangerous, were used for manufacturing activities, ship maintenance, and planning for the following year's trading expeditions. Harbour facilities developed by the Phoenicians represented significant advances in maritime infrastructure that facilitated the growth of international commerce. These installations included not only protected anchorages and loading facilities, but also warehouses, workshops, administrative buildings, and residential quarters for permanent merchant communities. The most sophisticated harbour complexes functioned as integrated commercial centres that could process large volumes of goods while providing services for visiting merchants and their crews. The standardization of ship designs and construction techniques throughout Phoenician commercial networks enabled the development of specialized vessel types optimized for different trading functions. Bulk cargo carriers were designed for maximum capacity and stability, while fast courier vessels prioritized speed and maneuverability for high-value or time-sensitive shipments. Warships incorporated the latest military technologies while maintaining the seaworthiness necessary for extended operations far from home bases. Crew management systems developed by Phoenician shipowners addressed the complex challenges of manning vessels for long-distance voyages. Recruitment practices drew sailors from diverse cultural backgrounds, creating multilingual crews capable of operating in foreign ports and communicating with local populations. Training programs ensured that crew members possessed the specialized skills necessary for safe navigation, cargo handling, and emergency response in dangerous maritime conditions. The insurance concepts pioneered by Phoenician merchants provided protection against the substantial risks inherent in ancient maritime commerce. Shared risk arrangements distributed potential losses among multiple investors, while compensation schemes provided support for merchants who suffered losses due to piracy, shipwreck, or political upheaval. These financial innovations made long-distance trade more predictable and encouraged investment in increasingly ambitious commercial ventures. Quality control systems maintained the reputation of Phoenician goods in international markets by ensuring consistent standards across different production centers. Guild regulations specified materials, construction techniques, and finishing processes that producers were required to follow. Inspection procedures verified that exported goods met established standards, while trademark systems helped customers identify authentic Phoenician products in foreign markets. The cultural adaptability demonstrated by Phoenician merchants operating in foreign markets reflected both practical necessity and sophisticated understanding of cross-cultural communication. Successful traders needed to understand local customs, religious practices, and social hierarchies in order to build the trust relationships essential for long-term commercial success. This cultural sensitivity enabled Phoenicians to establish permanent trading communities that were accepted and integrated into foreign societies. Language learning capabilities developed by Phoenician merchants enabled them to communicate effectively with trading partners throughout the Mediterranean. Many merchants became fluent in multiple languages, while others employed specialized interpreters who could facilitate complex commercial negotiations. The multilingual environment of Phoenician trading centers created opportunities for linguistic innovation and cross-cultural exchange that enriched the intellectual life of Mediterranean societies. The diplomatic immunities negotiated by Phoenician cities for their merchants operating in foreign territories provided legal protection that was essential for international commerce. These agreements established principles for resolving disputes, protecting property rights, and ensuring safe passage that would later influence the development of international law. The diplomatic skills required to negotiate and maintain these arrangements demonstrated the sophisticated statecraft that characterized Phoenician civilization. Commercial law developments within Phoenician cities addressed the complex legal challenges created by international relationships trade. Contract enforcement mechanisms provided remedies for breach of commercial agreements, while dispute resolution procedures offered alternatives to expensive and time-consuming litigation. Bankruptcy laws protected both creditors and debtors when commercial ventures failed, enabling the recovery and reorganization necessary for continued economic activity. The integration of religious observances with commercial activities reflected the Phoenician understanding of divine favor as essential to business success. Seasonal festivals were timed to coincide with important commercial activities, while religious ceremonies marked the departure and return of trading expeditions. Temple treasuries served as banks and investment funds, while priestly authorities often played important roles in validating commercial agreements and resolving disputes. Architectural innovations in Phoenician cities reflected both their maritime focus and their international commercial connections. Harbour districts featured specialized buildings designed for different commercial functions, while residential areas incorporated design elements borrowed from various Mediterranean cultures. Public buildings demonstrated the wealth generated by successful trade relationships, while defensive structures protected the accumulated riches that made Phoenician cities attractive targets for foreign powers. The urban planning principles applied in major Phoenician cities optimized the flow of goods and people through complex commercial environments. Street layouts facilitated the movement of cargo between harbors and warehouses, while zoning regulations separated residential, commercial, and industrial activities. Water supply and sewage systems supported dense urban populations, while fire prevention measures protected valuable commercial infrastructure from accidental destruction. Manufacturing districts within Phoenician cities achieved levels of specialization and efficiency that were remarkable for the ancient world. Glass production facilities incorporated advanced furnace designs and specialized tools that enabled mass production of standardized products. Textile workshops employed hundreds of workers in various specialized roles, from fiber preparation to final finishing of luxury fabrics. Metalworking centers combined raw material processing with sophisticated finishing techniques that created products renowned throughout the Mediterranean. The apprenticeship systems that transmitted technical knowledge within Phoenician craft industries ensured the continuation of specialized skills across generations. Master craftsmen selected promising young people for intensive training programs that combined theoretical instruction with practical experience. Guild structures provided framework for these educational activities while maintaining quality standards and protecting trade secrets that gave Phoenician products their competitive advantages. Innovation incentives within Phoenician commercial culture encouraged the development of new products, techniques, and business methods that could provide competitive advantages in international markets. Successful innovators could achieve substantial wealth and social status, while failed experiments were viewed as learning experiences rather than personal disasters. This cultural attitude toward innovation contributed to the technological and commercial dynamism that characterized Phoenician civilization. The scientific knowledge accumulated through Phoenician commercial activities included advances in astronomy, geography, meteorology, and natural history that were essential for successful navigation and trade. Astronomical observations enabled accurate timekeeping and celestial navigation, while geographical knowledge provided the foundation for accurate mapping and route planning. Meteorological understanding helped predict weather patterns and seasonal changes that affected sailing conditions and agricultural production. Medical knowledge developed by Phoenician merchants and sailors addressed the health challenges associated with long-distance travel and residence in foreign environments. Practical understanding of nutrition, disease prevention, and injury treatment was essential for maintaining crew health during extended voyages. Medical traditions incorporated knowledge gained from various Mediterranean cultures, creating synthetic approaches to healthcare that were more effective than any single cultural tradition. Botanical and zoological knowledge accumulated through international trade included detailed understanding of plants and animals that had commercial value or practical applications. Phoenician merchants were among the first to systematically catalogue the natural resources available in different regions, creating databases of information that guided investment decisions and commercial planning. This scientific approach to natural resource evaluation represented an early form of economic geography that would influence later developments in commercial science. Here at Obscure Histories, we have observed that many ancient civilizations achieved greatness through military conquest or political innovation, but the Phoenician achievement was fundamentally different. Their success was built upon the systematic application of scientific knowledge, technological innovation, and cultural adaptability to the challenges of international commerce. This approach created sustainable advantages that could not be easily copied or countered by military force alone. The environmental knowledge possessed by Phoenician merchants enabled them to predict and adapt to the seasonal and long-term changes that affected agricultural production and trade opportunities throughout the Mediterranean. Understanding of climate patterns, soil conditions, and hydrological cycles informed decisions about when and where to establish trading relationships. This environmental awareness also contributed to sustainable resource management practices that ensured the long-term availability of crucial raw materials. The demographic patterns that characterized Phoenician cities reflected both their commercial success and their international connections. Population growth was sustained not only by natural increase, but also by immigration from other parts of the Mediterranean as people were attracted by economic opportunities and cultural dynamism. This demographic diversity created cosmopolitan urban environments that facilitated cultural exchange and innovation. Social mobility within Phoenician society was facilitated by the commercial focus that valued practical skills and entrepreneurial success over traditional markers of status such as noble birth or military achievement. Talented individuals from modest backgrounds could achieve wealth and prominence through successful business ventures, while established families could lose status if they failed to adapt to changing commercial conditions. This social fluidity contributed to the dynamism and adaptability that characterized Phoenician civilization. The educational opportunities available in Phoenician cities extended beyond basic literacy and numeracy to include specialized training in languages, geography, law, and technical skills required for international commerce. Private tutors and professional schools provided advanced education for the children of wealthy merchant families, while guild apprenticeships offered practical training for those seeking careers in specialized crafts or technical fields. Cultural synthesis within Phoenician cities created unique artistic and intellectual traditions that combined elements from various Mediterranean cultures with distinctive Phoenician innovations. This synthetic approach to culture reflected both the practical needs of international merchants and the intellectual curiosity that characterized Phoenician society. The resulting cultural productions were both familiar enough to appeal to international audiences and distinctive enough to maintain Phoenician identity. The philosophical and intellectual developments that emerged from Phoenician commercial culture included early forms of economic theory, international relations concepts, and practical ethics adapted to the challenges of cross-cultural business relationships. These intellectual traditions would later influence Greek and Roman thought, contributing to the development of Western philosophical traditions in ways that are still being discovered by modern scholars. The legacy systems developed by wealthy Phoenician merchants ensured the continuation of successful business enterprises across generations, while providing for the broader welfare of their communities. Inheritance practices balanced family interests with business continuity, while charitable foundations supported public works and cultural activities that enhanced the reputation and prosperity of Phoenician cities. The record-keeping systems that supported Phoenician commercial activities generated vast archives of information about economic conditions, political relationships, and cultural developments throughout the Mediterranean. These archives, though largely lost to modern researchers, provided the informational foundation for the sophisticated commercial and diplomatic strategies that enabled Phoenician civilization to thrive for nearly a millennium. The communication networks maintained by Phoenician merchants created some of the most efficient information transmission systems available in the ancient world. Regular shipping schedules enabled the rapid distribution of commercial intelligence innovations correspondence, and cultural diplomatic throughout their trading networks. These communication capabilities gave Phoenician cities significant advantages in coordinating responses to political and economic challenges. The technological transfer mechanisms embedded in Phoenician commercial relationships facilitated the rapid spread of innovations throughout the Mediterranean world. New technologies were quickly adopted and adapted by Phoenician craftsmen, then transmitted to other societies through normal commercial channels. This technological diffusion accelerated the pace of innovation throughout the region and contributed to the general advancement of Mediterranean civilizations. The standardization efforts undertaken by Phoenician commercial organizations extended beyond weights and measures to include quality standards, contractual terms, and business practices that facilitated international trade. These standardization initiatives reduced transaction costs and created predictable commercial environments that encouraged long-term investment and relationship building. The risk management strategies employed by Phoenician merchants addressed both the immediate dangers of maritime commerce and the long-term challenges of maintaining commercial relationships across political and cultural boundaries. Diversification of investments, geographic distribution of activities, and cultivation of alternative suppliers and markets provided protection against various types of disruption that could threaten commercial success. The competitive advantages developed by Phoenician civilization were based on systematic investments in knowledge, technology, and relationship building, rather than on temporary factors such as resource abundance or military superiority. This approach created sustainable foundations for long-term prosperity that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential commercial functions. The international perspective that characterized Phoenician culture reflected both practical necessity and intellectual curiosity about the wider world beyond their immediate homeland. This cosmopolitan outlook enabled them to identify opportunities and navigate challenges that would have been invisible to more insular civilizations. The intellectual breadth that resulted from this international engagement contributed to innovations in many fields beyond commerce, including art, literature, religion, and political theory. The colonial expansion that would define the height of Phoenician achievement began in earnest during the 9th century BCE, as population pressures and commercial opportunities drove merchants beyond the traditional boundaries of Mediterranean trade. Unlike the military conquests that characterized other ancient empires, Phoenician expansion followed the patterns of commercial opportunity and strategic advantage. Their colonies were established not as conquered territories, but as extensions of existing commercial networks, designed to facilitate trade and provide secure bases for further exploration. The process of colonial foundation followed well-established procedures that reflected generations of experience in establishing overseas settlements. Potential sites were carefully evaluated for their strategic advantages, including natural harbours, defensive positions, access to local resources, and proximity to existing trade routes. Advance parties conducted detailed surveys of coastlines and inland territories, assessing everything from water supplies and soil quality to political conditions and local population densities. The selection of colonial sites demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both immediate practical needs and long-term strategic considerations. Ideal locations provided protected harbours that could accommodate the largest merchant vessels, while offering easy access to inland markets and resources. Defensive considerations were paramount, as colonies needed to protect themselves and their accumulated wealth from both local threats and seaborne raiders who might target prosperous trading centres. The initial phases of colonial establishment typically involve negotiations with existing local populations rather than military conquest. Phoenician colonists preferred to establish mutually beneficial relationships with indigenous peoples, offering manufactured goods, technical knowledge, and access to international markets in exchange for land rights, local resources, and political cooperation. These diplomatic approaches proved more sustainable than military occupation and created foundations for long-term prosperity. The demographic composition of early Phoenician colonies reflected the commercial priorities that drove their establishment. Initial settlers typically included experienced merchants who could establish trading relationships, skilled craftsmen who could produce goods for local and international markets, and technical specialists such as shipbuilders and metalworkers whose expertise was essential for maintaining commercial operations. These founding populations were often supplemented by local inhabitants who joined the colonial communities through marriage, business partnerships, or employment opportunities. The governance structures established in Phoenician colonies balanced the need for effective local administration with the maintenance of connections to parent cities in the homeland. Colonial governments typically followed models derived from Phoenician city-states, with local councils of prominent merchants making major decisions while appointed officials handled day-to-day administrative functions. These arrangements provided sufficient autonomy to respond to local conditions while maintaining the political and commercial relationships that justified colonial foundation. The most famous and successful of Phoenician colonial foundations all was Carthage, established on the North African coast in what is now Tunisia. According to traditional accounts, Carthage was founded by colonists from Tyre, led by Princess Dido in the late 9th century BCE. The strategic location chosen for this new city commanded excellent harbours while providing access to the rich agricultural lands of North Africa and the trans-Saharan trade routes that brought gold and ivory from the African interior. The rapid growth of Carthage from a modest trading post to a major Mediterranean power demonstrated the effectiveness of Phoenician colonial strategies. The city's founders carefully cultivated relationships with local Berber populations, establishing commercial partnerships that provided access to regional resources and markets. Carthaginian merchants quickly established their own network of trading posts and colonies throughout the Western Mediterranean, creating a commercial empire that would eventually rival and surpass the achievements of their Tyrian founders. The agricultural development undertaken by Carthaginian colonists transformed the North African landscape through intensive cultivation techniques and sophisticated irrigation systems. The fertile coastal plains were planted with grains, olives, and vineyards that produced surplus crops for export throughout the Mediterranean. The famous Carthaginian agricultural manual, written by Mago, became a standard reference work that influenced farming practices throughout the Roman world for centuries after Carthage's eventual destruction. The military capabilities developed by Carthage reflected both their Phoenician heritage and the unique challenges of maintaining a far-flung colonial empire. The Carthaginian navy became the most formidable maritime force in the Western Mediterranean, employing advanced ship designs and professional crews to protect merchant vessels and project power throughout their sphere of influence. Their naval innovations included improvements in ramming tactics, boarding procedures, and the coordination of fleet operations that would influence naval warfare for generations. The relationship between Carthage and other Phoenician cities evolved over time from simple colonial dependency to complex networks of alliance and competition. As Carthage grew in wealth and power, it began to establish its own colonies and trading posts, sometimes competing directly with established Phoenician settlements for markets and resources. This competition drove innovation and expansion throughout the Phoenician world, as different cities sought to maintain their competitive positions through new commercial ventures and territorial acquisitions. The Iberian Peninsula attracted extensive Phoenician colonial activity due to its abundant mineral resources, particularly silver deposits, that were essential for international commerce. The establishment of trading posts along the Spanish coast provided access to these precious metals while creating markets for Phoenician manufactured goods. The most important of these settlements was Gadir, modern Cadiz, which became a major center for Atlantic exploration and trade beyond the traditional Mediterranean boundaries. The exploitation of Iberian silver resources required sophisticated mining and metallurgical techniques that demonstrated advanced Phoenician technological capabilities. Underground mining operations extracted ore from deep deposits, while smelting facilities processed raw materials into standardized ingots suitable for international trade. The scale of these operations was enormous, with thousands of workers employed in various aspects of mineral extraction and processing. The cultural impact of Phoenician colonization in Iberia extended far beyond simple commercial exchange. Local populations adopted Phoenician artistic styles, religious practices, and technological innovations that transformed indigenous cultures throughout the region. The introduction of the Phoenician alphabet enabled the development of written languages previously among non-Phoenician architectural techniques, influenced the design of literate peoples, while public buildings and private residences. The Atlantic exploration conducted from Marian Ib bases pushed the boundaries of known geography far beyond the traditional limits of Mediterranean navigation. Phoenician sailors ventured northward along the European coast, possibly reaching Britain in search of tin deposits essential for bronze production. Southward expeditions explored the African coast, establishing trading relationships with indigenous populations and gathering geographical information that would guide future commercial ventures. The island colonies established by Phoenician merchants throughout the Mediterranean served as crucial waypoints for long-distance navigation while providing bases for local and regional trade. Cyprus, with its abundant copper deposits, became an early focus of Phoenician colonial activity. The island's strategic position at the eastern end of the Mediterranean made it an ideal base for trade with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Lev coast. Antine Sardinia attracted Phoenician colonists due to its mineral wealth and strategic position in the central Mediterranean. The establishment of permanent settlements on the island provided secure bases for further expansion westward, while creating markets for goods flowing between the eastern and western Mediterranean. The cultural synthesis that developed in Sardinian Phoenician colonies combined indigenous traditions with innovations brought from the homeland, creating distinctive regional variations within the broader Phoenician cultural sphere. Sicily's fertile agricultural lands and strategic position at the crossroads of Mediterranean navigation made it another important focus of Phoenician colonial activity. The western portion of the island became heavily influenced by Phoenician culture, with major settlements serving as agricultural centers and commercial hubs. The competition with Greek colonists in eastern Sicily created complex political and military situations that would influence Mediterranean politics for centuries. The commercial networks established by Phoenician colonies created unprecedented levels of economic integration throughout the Mediterranean basin. Goods could flow efficiently between distant regions through established chains of trading posts and allied settlements. This economic integration facilitated cultural exchange on a scale never before achieved, creating shared traditions and mutual influences that transcended political boundaries. The standardization of commercial practices throughout Phoenician colonial networks reduced transaction costs and created predictable business environments that encouraged long-term investment and relationship building. Common weights and measures, standardized contractual terms, and established dispute resolution procedures enabled merchants from different colonies to conduct business efficiently, despite vast geographical distances and cultural differences. The technological innovations developed in Phoenician colonies often reflected local conditions and resources, while maintaining connections to broader technological traditions. Colonial craftsmen adapted homeland techniques to local materials and markets, creating regional specializations that enhanced the overall competitiveness of Phoenician commercial networks. These innovations were then transmitted throughout the colonial system, contributing to technological advancement across the entire Phoenician sphere of influence. The religious practices that developed in Phoenician colonies combined traditional homeland deities with local spiritual traditions, creating syncretic belief systems that facilitated cultural integration while maintaining distinctive Phoenician identity. Colonial temples served not only as centers of worship, but also as community focal points and commercial institutions that provided banking services and dispute resolution mechanisms. The linguistic evolution that occurred in Phoenician colonies reflected both the practical needs of multilingual commercial environments and the cultural dynamics of colonial societies. While maintaining their Phoenician linguistic identity, colonial populations often became multilingual, facilitating communication with indigenous populations and other Mediterranean peoples. This linguistic adaptability enhanced their effectiveness as cultural intermediaries and commercial facilitators. The artistic traditions that flourished in Phoenician colonies demonstrated remarkable creativity in combining homeland styles with local influences and imported motifs from various Mediterranean cultures. Colonial artists had access to diverse materials and markets that enabled experimentation and innovation beyond what was possible in the more conservative homeland cities. These artistic developments influenced both local indigenous cultures and broader Mediterranean artistic traditions. The educational systems that developed in major Phoenician colonies provided advanced training opportunities that were often superior to those available in smaller homeland cities. Colonial schools attracted students from throughout the Mediterranean, creating international centers of learning that facilitated cultural exchange and intellectual development. The practical focus of Phoenician education, emphasizing languages, mathematics, and commercial skills, proved highly attractive to students from various cultural backgrounds. The legal systems that governed Phoenician colonies balanced the need for consistency with homeland practices against the requirements of local conditions and relationships with indigenous populations. Colonial legal codes typically incorporated elements of traditional Phoenician law with local customs and practical adaptations necessary for governing diverse populations. These synthetic legal systems often proved more flexible and effective than purely traditional approaches. The diplomatic relationships established by Phoenician colonies with local populations and other Mediterranean powers demonstrated sophisticated understanding of international relations and conflict resolution. Colonial diplomats often served as intermediaries between different cultural groups, facilitating negotiations and agreements that promoted regional stability and commercial prosperity. These diplomatic skills contributed significantly to the long-term success of Phoenician colonial ventures. The military organizations developed by Phoenician colonies reflected both their commercial priorities and the security challenges they faced in diverse geographical and political environments. Colonial military forces typically emphasized naval capabilities and defensive strategies rather than offensive conquest, focusing on protecting commercial assets and maintaining secure trading environments. The integration of local military traditions and personnel often enhanced the effectiveness of colonial defense systems. The urban planning principles applied in Phoenician colonial cities demonstrated advanced understanding of both functional requirements and aesthetic considerations. Colonial cities were designed to facilitate efficient commercial operations while providing pleasant living environments for diverse populations. Harbour districts, residential areas, and manufacturing zones were carefully integrated to maximize both economic efficiency and social harmony. The agricultural innovations developed in Phoenician colonies often involved the adaptation of homeland techniques to local environmental conditions and the integration of indigenous agricultural knowledge. Colonial farmers experimented with crop varieties, irrigation techniques, and land management practices that enhance productivity while maintaining environmental sustainability. These agricultural developments contributed to the overall prosperity of colonial communities, while creating exportable surpluses that supported international trade. The manufacturing capabilities established in Phoenician colonies often exceeded those of the homeland cities due to access to superior raw materials and larger markets. Colonial craftsmen developed regional specializations that took advantage of local resources, while maintaining quality standards that enabled their products to compete successfully in international markets. The resulting economic specialization enhanced the overall efficiency and competitiveness of Phoenician commercial networks. The financial systems that developed in major Phoenician colonies provided sophisticated banking and investment services that facilitated both local economic development and international commerce. Colonial banks offered credit facilities, currency exchange services, and investment opportunities that attracted capital from throughout the Mediterranean. These financial innovations contributed to the economic dynamism that characterized successful Phoenician colonial ventures. The transportation networks that connected Phoenician colonies created unprecedented levels of mobility for both people and goods throughout the Mediterranean basin. Regular shipping schedules linked distant colonies with homeland cities and with each other, creating reliable communication and supply chains that enhanced the overall effectiveness of the colonial system. These transportation capabilities also facilitated cultural exchange and technological diffusion on an unprecedented scale. The information networks maintained by Phoenician colonial administrators provided early warning systems for political and economic developments that could affect commercial operations. Colonial officials maintained regular correspondence with homeland authorities and with other colonies, creating comprehensive intelligence systems that enabled coordinated responses to various challenges and opportunities. This information sharing capability gave Phoenician commercial networks significant advantages over less organized competitors. The cultural synthesis that characterized mature Phoenician colonies created distinctive regional identities that combined homeland traditions with local innovations and international influences. These synthetic cultures were often more dynamic and adaptable than purely traditional societies, enabling communities colonial to respond effectively to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character and commercial focus. The competitive advantages developed by successful Phoenician colonies were based on systematic investments in infrastructure, education, and relationship building, rather than on temporary factors such as favorable political conditions or resource abundance. This approach created sustainable foundations for long-term prosperity that could survive political upheavals and economic disruptions that destroyed less well-established communities. The legacy of Phoenician colonization extended far beyond the immediate commercial benefits that motivated colonial foundation. The cities, institutions, and cultural traditions established by Phoenician colonists provided foundations for subsequent developments throughout the Mediterranean that continued long after the original Phoenician political entities had disappeared. Modern cities from Cadiz to Palermo still bear traces of their Phoenician origins in their street layouts, architectural traditions, and cultural practices. Here at Obscure Histories, we have examined many examples of ancient colonization that were based primarily on military conquest and political domination. The Phoenician approach, emphasizing commercial opportunity and cultural synthesis, proved far more durable and influential in long term. Their colonial legacy contributed to the development of Mediterranean civilization in ways that continue to influence our modern world. The economic integration achieved through Phoenician colonial networks created the first truly international commercial system in human history. The standardization of practices, the development of financial instruments, and the creation of reliable transportation and communication systems established precedents that would influence commercial development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The cultural diffusion facilitated by Phoenician colonial activities contributed to the development of shared Mediterranean traditions in art, literature, religion, and philosophy that transcended political boundaries and created foundations for subsequent cultural developments. The intellectual cross-pollination that occurred in Phoenician colonial cities contributed to innovations in many fields that influence human civilization for millennia. The technological innovations developed in Phoenician colonial contexts, particularly in navigation, shipbuilding, and manufacturing, provided foundations for subsequent advances that would enable even more ambitious exploration and commercial ventures. The systematic approach to technological development that characterized Phoenician colonial society established patterns of innovation and adaptation that would influence technological progress throughout the ancient world. The political and legal innovations pioneered in Phoenician colonial governments contributed to the development of more sophisticated approaches to governance, law, and international relations that would influence political development throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The balance between local autonomy and centralized coordination that characterized successful Phoenician colonial administration provided models for later imperial and federal systems. The social innovations that emerged from the diverse cosmopolitan environments of major Phoenician colonies contributed to the development of more flexible and inclusive approaches to social organization that recognized merit and achievement rather than birth or cultural origin as the primary determinants of social status. These social innovations contributed to the development of more dynamic and adaptable societies throughout the Mediterranean region. The environmental adaptations developed by Phoenician colonists in diverse geographical settings contributed to advances in agriculture, resource management, and environmental science that would influence human relationships with the natural world for centuries. The sustainable approaches to resource exploitation that characterized successful Phoenician colonial ventures provided models for environmental management that remain relevant today. The intellectual traditions that developed in major centers contributed to advances Phoenician colonial in mathematics, astronomy, geography, and other sciences that provided foundations for subsequent intellectual developments throughout the Mediterranean world. The practical orientation of Phoenician intellectual life, emphasizing applications and problem-solving rather than abstract theory, created approaches to knowledge that would influence scientific and technological development for generations. The artistic and literary traditions that flourished in Phoenician colonial contexts created new forms of cultural expression that combined diverse influences in innovative ways. These cultural developments contributed to the richness and diversity of Mediterranean civilization while creating distinctive traditions that would influence artistic and literary development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The religious and philosophical developments that emerged from the multicultural environments of Phoenician colonies contributed to more sophisticated approaches to spirituality and ethics that could accommodate diverse beliefs and practices while maintaining social coherence. These religious innovations would influence the development of later Mediterranean religious traditions and contribute to the evolution of more inclusive and adaptable spiritual systems. The demographic patterns established by Phoenician colonization created more diverse and cosmopolitan populations throughout the Mediterranean that were better adapted to the challenges of international commerce and cultural exchange. The social mobility and cultural adaptability that characterized Phoenician colonial societies provided models for social organization that would influence subsequent developments in Mediterranean civilization. The linguistic developments that occurred in Phoenician colonial contexts contributed to the evolution of Mediterranean languages and the spread of literacy throughout the region. The multilingual capabilities developed by colonial populations facilitated communication and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale, creating foundations for the intellectual and cultural developments that would characterize later Mediterranean civilization. The commercial innovations pioneered in Phoenician colonial markets created more sophisticated and efficient systems of exchange that could accommodate the complex requirements of international trade while maintaining local flexibility and responsiveness. These commercial developments provided foundations for economic systems that would influence commercial practice throughout the ancient world and establish precedents for modern international commerce. The diplomatic traditions established by Phoenician colonial administrators contributed to more sophisticated approaches to international relations that emphasized negotiation, compromise, and mutual benefit rather than military conquest and political domination. These diplomatic innovations would influence the development of international law and peaceful conflict resolution throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The military innovations that emerged from Phoenician colonial experiences reflected the unique challenges of protecting far-flung commercial networks while maintaining the mobility and flexibility essential to maritime trade. Unlike the massive armies assembled by territorial empires, Phoenician military forces emphasized speed, adaptability, and technological superiority over sheer numbers. Their approach to warfare was fundamentally defensive, designed to protect commercial assets and maintain secure trading environments. rather than to pursue territorial conquest. Naval warfare represented the cornerstone of Phoenician military doctrine, with their warships achieving legendary status throughout the Mediterranean for their speed, maneuverability, and devastating effectiveness in combat. These vessels incorporated centuries of shipbuilding expertise with continuous innovations in design and construction that kept pace with evolving tactical requirements. The famous bronze-reinforced rams that projected from their prows could shatter enemy hulls with devastating impact, while specialized boarding equipment enabled their crews to capture rather than simply destroy opposing vessels. The crews that manned these warships were professional sailors, whose skills had been honed through years of experience in both commercial and military operations. Unlike the conscripted oarsmen employed by many contemporary navies, Phoenician crews were volunteers who saw naval service as a path to advancement and prosperity. This professional approach to naval warfare created highly motivated and exceptionally skilled fighting forces that could execute complex tactical maneuvers with precision and coordination. The tactical innovations developed by Phoenician naval commanders revolutionized Mediterranean warfare through their emphasis on speed and surprise over traditional ramming attacks. Their fleets could appear suddenly at distant locations, strike with devastating effectiveness, and disappear before enemy reinforcements could respond. This mobility-based strategy proved particularly effective against the more conventional naval forces of their contemporaries, who relied on massive formations and direct confrontation. The integration of intelligence gathering with naval operations created sophisticated early warning systems that enabled Phoenician commanders to anticipate enemy movements and position their forces advantageously. Networks of coastal observers, merchant vessels serving dual purposes, and diplomatic contacts provided comprehensive information about enemy preparations and intentions. This intelligence capability gave Phoenician naval forces significant tactical advantages that often proved decisive in combat situations. The fortification systems that protected major Phoenician cities and colonies demonstrated remarkable sophistication in combining natural defensive advantages with advanced engineering techniques. Island locations like Tyre were enhanced through artificial constructions that made them virtually impregnable to conventional siege methods. Massive walls incorporated multiple lines defensive, overlapping fields of fire, and sophisticated water management systems that could sustain extended sieges. The siege warfare techniques developed by Phoenician military engineers reflected their practical approach to problem solving and their access to advanced metallurgical and construction technologies. Rather than relying on massive assault forces, they preferred to employ technological solutions that could overcome enemy defenses through superior engineering and tactical innovation. Their siege equipment incorporated improvements in materials, design, and operation that made them more effective than contemporary alternatives. The alliance systems that connected Phoenician cities with foreign powers created military partnerships that provided mutual defense benefits, while avoiding the costs and risks of maintaining large permanent armies. These alliances were typically based on commercial relationships and diplomatic agreements rather than military conquest or political domination. The resulting military networks proved both flexible and durable, adapting to changing political circumstances while maintaining essential defensive capabilities. The mercenary forces employed by Phoenician cities reflected both their commercial wealth and their practical approach to military organization. Rather than maintaining expensive standing armies, they preferred to hire professional soldiers when military action became necessary. These mercenary forces were often superior to citizen militias in training, equipment, and combat effectiveness, while their employment avoided the social and economic disruptions associated with mass military conscription. The logistics systems that supported Phoenician military operations demonstrated the same organizational sophistication that characterized their commercial activities. Supply chains could maintain military forces operating at great distances from their bases, while communication networks enabled coordinated operations across multiple theaters. These logistical capabilities gave Phoenician military forces significant advantages in sustained operations and strategic mobility. The weapons technology developed by Phoenician armorers incorporated the latest advances in metallurgy and engineering while maintaining the portability and reliability essential for maritime operations. Their bronze and iron weapons were renowned throughout the Mediterranean for their quality and effectiveness, while their armor provided superior protection without sacrificing mobility. The standardization of weapons and equipment across different military units enabled efficient logistics and maintenance operations. The training methods employed by Phoenician military organizations emphasized practical skills and real-world applications over ceremonial traditions and formal drill procedures. Soldiers and sailors learned their trades through apprenticeships and gradual advancement rather than through mass training programs. This individualized approach to military education produced highly skilled professionals who could adapt quickly to changing tactical situations and operational requirements. The medical support systems that accompanied Phoenician military forces reflected their understanding of the importance of maintaining personnel health and morale during extended campaigns. Military physicians employed techniques and treatments that had been developed through centuries of maritime experience, while field hospitals provided care that was often superior to that available to civilian populations. These medical capabilities contributed significantly to the effectiveness and sustainability of Phoenician military operations. The communication systems that coordinated Phoenician military activities employed both traditional methods and innovative techniques that enhanced command and control capabilities. Signal fires, messenger networks, and naval communications enabled commanders to coordinate complex operations across vast distances while maintaining the flexibility essential for rapid response to changing circumstances. These communication capabilities gave Phoenician military forces significant advantages in strategic and tactical coordination. The psychological warfare techniques employed by Phoenician commanders reflected their sophisticated understanding of human motivation and group dynamics. Rather than relying solely on intimidation through displays of force, they preferred to undermine enemy morale through strategic deception, diplomatic manipulation, and the demonstration of superior capabilities. These psychological approaches often proved more effective than direct military confrontation in achieving strategic objectives. The veteran care systems established by Phoenician cities provided support for soldiers and sailors who had served in military capacities, recognizing both their contributions and the practical value of maintaining experienced personnel. These support systems included pension arrangements, medical care, and opportunities for continued employment in civilian capacities. The care provided to military veterans contributed to recruitment effectiveness and unit morale throughout Phoenician military organizations. The civil defense preparations that protected Phoenician cities from military attack involved entire populations in coordinated responses to various threats. Citizens received training in firefighting, emergency medical care, and evacuation procedures that could minimize casualties and property damage during attacks. These civil defense capabilities enhance the overall resilience of Phoenician communities, while reducing the burden on military forces during crisis situations. The cultural dimensions of Phoenician military service reflected the integration of martial values with commercial priorities and civic responsibilities. Military service was viewed as an honorable profession that contributed to community welfare and individual advancement, rather than as a burden imposed by political authorities. This cultural attitude toward military service contributed to the effectiveness and reliability of Phoenician military forces, while maintaining their integration with civilian society. Here at Obscure Histories, we have examined many ancient civilizations that achieved military dominance through massive armies and aggressive conquest, but the Phoenician approach emphasized efficiency, professionalism, and technological superiority over raw numbers and territorial ambition. Their military innovations contributed to defensive capabilities that protected their commercial networks, while avoiding the costs and risks associated with large-scale military adventures. The intelligence networks that supported Phoenician military planning provided comprehensive information about potential threats and opportunities throughout their sphere of influence. These networks combined commercial intelligence gathering with diplomatic contacts and specialized reconnaissance activities to create detailed assessments of political and military conditions across the Mediterranean. The quality and scope of this intelligence capability gave Phoenician military planners significant advantages in strategic decision-making. The technological transfer mechanisms that connected Phoenician military innovations with their commercial and colonial networks ensured that advances in weapons, tactics, and organization spread rapidly throughout their sphere of influence. Military innovations developed in one location could be quickly adapted and implemented elsewhere, creating consistent standards of capability across different military units and geographical areas. The religious dimensions of Phoenician military culture involved elaborate ceremonies and rituals that sought divine protection for military ventures while reinforcing unit cohesion and morale. Military units maintained relationships deities who, with specific, were believed to provide protection and guidance during combat operations. These religious practices contributed to the psychological preparation and social integration that enhanced military effectiveness. The economic impact of Phoenician military activities extended far beyond the immediate costs of maintaining defensive capabilities. Military spending stimulated technological innovation and industrial development while creating employment opportunities for skilled craftsmen and professional soldiers. The economic benefits generated by military preparedness often exceeded the direct costs, contributing to overall prosperity and social stability. The environmental adaptations that characterize Phoenician military operations reflected their global perspective and diverse operational requirements. Military forces needed to operate effectively in various climates and geographical conditions throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. This environmental adaptability required specialized equipment, training, and logistical support that enhanced the overall capabilities of Phoenician military organizations. The diplomatic immunity arrangements that protected Phoenician military personnel operating in foreign territories demonstrated the sophisticated international legal frameworks that governed ancient Mediterranean relationships. These arrangements provided legal protection for military advisors, naval personnel, and security forces, while establishing precedents for international military cooperation that would influence subsequent developments in international law. The retirement transition programs that assisted military personnel in moving to civilian careers reflected the practical value placed on experienced personnel and the importance of maintaining good relationships with former military members. These programs provided training, financial support, and job placement assistance that enabled successful transitions while maintaining networks of experienced individuals who could provide advice and assistance during future crises. The research and development activities that supported Phoenician military innovation involved systematic efforts to improve weapons, tactics, and organization through experimentation and analysis. Military engineers and tacticians conducted studies of foreign military practices while developing new approaches could provide that competitive advantages. These research efforts contributed to the technological and tactical superiority that characterized Phoenician military forces. The quality control systems that maintained standards for military equipment and training ensured consistent performance across different units and geographical locations. Standardized specifications for weapons, armor, and equipment enabled efficient logistics and maintenance operations, while ensuring that all military personnel had access to reliable and effective tools. These quality control measures contributed significantly to the overall effectiveness of Phoenician military organizations. The recruitment systems that attracted personnel to Phoenician military service emphasized opportunity, advancement, and professional development rather than compulsion or patriotic obligation. Military service provided pathways to social mobility and economic advancement that were attractive to ambitious individuals from various backgrounds. This voluntary approach to military recruitment produced more motivated and reliable personnel than conscription systems employed by other civilizations. The educational institutions that supported Phoenician military development provided advanced training in strategy, tactics, engineering, and leadership that prepared officers for complex operational responsibilities. These institutions attracted students from throughout the Mediterranean, creating international centers of military learning that facilitated the exchange of ideas and innovations. The quality of military education provided by these institutions contributed to the professional competence that characterized Phoenician military leadership. The technological innovation cycles that characterize Phoenician military development involved continuous efforts to improve capabilities through research, experimentation, and adaptation of foreign innovations. Military technicians maintained awareness of developments throughout the Mediterranean while conducting their own research into improvements in materials, design, and performance. These innovation cycles ensured that Phoenician military forces maintained technological advantages over potential adversaries. The strategic planning processes that guided Phoenician military policy involved comprehensive assessments of threats, opportunities, and capabilities that enabled effective resource allocation and operational preparation. Strategic planners considered both immediate tactical requirements and long-term trends that could affect security needs. These planning processes contributed to the effectiveness and sustainability of Phoenician military strategies. The international cooperation arrangements that connected Phoenician military forces with allied organizations created mutual support networks that enhanced the capabilities of all participants. These arrangements involved intelligence sharing, joint training exercises, and coordinated responses to common threats. The international military relationships developed through these cooperation arrangements contributed to regional stability and security. The cultural exchange programs that connected Phoenician military personnel with foreign counterparts facilitated the sharing of knowledge, techniques, and innovations that enhanced the capabilities of all participants. Military exchanges provided opportunities for professional development and cultural understanding that contributed to more effective international military cooperation. These exchange programs also contributed to the diplomatic relationships that supported Phoenician commercial and political interests. The religious landscape of Phoenician civilization reflected their cosmopolitan outlook and practical approach to spiritual matters, incorporating deities and practices from throughout the known world while maintaining distinctive theological traditions rooted in their Canaanite heritage. This synthetic approach to religion served both spiritual and practical functions, providing divine protection for commercial ventures, while facilitating cultural integration in their far-flung colonial territories. The pantheon worshipped by Phoenician communities included both traditional Canaanite deities and foreign gods adopted through commercial contact and colonial expansion. This accumulative two-div approachinity reflected a fundamental belief that spiritual security required comprehensive coverage rather than exclusive devotion to a limited number of deities. The practical mentality that characterized Phoenician commerce extended to their religious practices, where the risks of inadvertently offending unknown gods were considered too great to ignore. The supreme divine couple that headed the Phoenician pantheon consisted of Baal, the storm god who controlled weather and agricultural fertility, and Astarte, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. These deities embodied the dual nature of Phoenician concerns, combining the agricultural foundations essential for survival with the martial vigor necessary for protecting commercial interests. Their worship involved elaborate festivals that celebrated both seasonal cycles and commercial successes. The worship of Melkart, the patron deity of Tyre, demonstrated the close connection between religious practice and civic identity in Phoenician cities. Melkart served as both divine protector and symbolic representation of Tyrian commercial supremacy, with temples dedicated to his worship serving as centers for both religious ceremony and commercial activity. The annual festivals celebrating Melkart involved elaborate processions and sacrificial ceremonies that reinforced community solidarity while invoking divine protection for maritime ventures. The goddess Tanit, particularly prominent in Carthaginian religion, exemplified the evolution of Phoenician religious practices in colonial contexts. Originally a local North African deity, Tanit was incorporated into the Phoenician pantheon through the syncretic processes that characterized their approach to religious integration. Her worship involved distinctive iconography and ceremonial practices that combined traditional Phoenician elements with local African traditions. The religious architecture that characterized major Phoenician cities reflected both their wealth and their theological priorities, with temple complexes serving multiple functions as centers of worship, commercial activity, and civic administration. These structures incorporated design elements from various Mediterranean traditions while maintaining distinctively Phoenician characteristics. The most important temples were built on prominent locations that dominated urban skylines and provided visual symbols of divine protection. The sacrificial practices that formed the core of Phoenician religious observance involved elaborate ceremonies designed to secure divine favor for various undertakings. Animal sacrifices were conducted according to detailed ritual prescriptions that specified appropriate offerings for different deities and occasions. The most important sacrifices involved multiple animals and elaborate ceremonial procedures that could last for several days. The priesthood that administered Phoenician religious institutions wielded considerable influence in both spiritual and temporal affairs, often serving as advisors to kings and major merchants, while administering the substantial wealth accumulated by temple treasuries. Priestly positions were typically hereditary, creating religious dynasties that maintained continuity across generations, while accumulating theological knowledge and administrative expertise. The religious festivals that punctuated the Phoenician calendar served both spiritual and social functions, providing occasions for community celebration, while reinforcing religious devotion and civic identity. These festivals often coincided with important commercial activities, such as the departure or return of trading expeditions, creating connections between spiritual observance and economic success. The largest festivals attracted participants from throughout the Mediterranean, contributing to cultural exchange and diplomatic relationships. The mystery cults that developed within Phoenician religious traditions provided esoteric spiritual experiences for initiates while maintaining connections to broader community religious practices. These cults typically involved secret ceremonies and specialized knowledge that were revealed only to qualified participants. The mystery traditions that developed in major Phoenician cities influenced religious developments throughout the Mediterranean. The funerary practices that characterized Phoenician communities reflected both their religious beliefs about afterlife and their social hierarchies, with elaborate burial procedures reserved for wealthy merchants and prominent citizens. Grave goods included items believed necessary for the deceased in the afterlife, often reflecting their professional activities and social status. The most elaborate burials involved multiple chambers and extensive grave goods that demonstrated both wealth and religious devotion. The religious syncretism that characterized Phoenician colonial territories involved the systematic integration of local deities and practices with traditional Phoenician religious elements. This process created distinctive regional variations within the broader Phoenician religious tradition, while facilitating cultural integration between colonists and indigenous populations. The resulting synthetic religious traditions often proved more appealing and durable than purely traditional approaches. The prophetic traditions that developed within Phoenician religious culture provided guidance for both individual decisions and community policies through divination and oracular pronouncements. Professional prophets employed various techniques for communicating with, including dream divine powers interpretation, observation of natural phenomena, and ritual procedures designed to induce prophetic states. These prophetic services were particularly important for merchants planning dangerous voyages or major commercial ventures. The religious law codes that governed Phoenician communities addressed both ritual requirements and ethical obligations, creating comprehensive systems of religious and moral guidance. These codes specified proper procedures for worship, sacrifice, and ceremonial observance while also addressing issues of social justice and commercial ethics. The integration of religious and legal systems created unified frameworks for community governance and individual behavior. The theological literature that preserved Phoenician religious traditions included creation myths, heroic narratives, and ritual instructions that transmitted spiritual knowledge across generations. These texts were typically written in the alphabetic script developed by Phoenician scribes, making religious knowledge more accessible than the complex writing systems used by other contemporary civilizations. The preservation of religious literature contributed to the continuity and coherence of Phoenician spiritual traditions. The religious education systems that transmitted theological knowledge within Phoenician communities involved both formal instruction in temple schools and informal transmission through family traditions. Young people destined for priestly careers received extensive training in ritual procedures, theological doctrine, and administrative skills necessary for temple management. This educational system ensured the continuity of religious traditions while adapting to changing circumstances and foreign influences. The pilgrimage practices that connected Phoenician communities across the Mediterranean created networks of religious and cultural exchange that reinforced shared identity while facilitating commercial relationships. Major temples attracted visitors from throughout the Phoenician world, creating opportunities for both spiritual fulfillment and business networking. These pilgrimage networks contributed to the cultural cohesion that bound together far-flung Phoenician communities. The religious calendar that organized Phoenician spiritual life coordinated local observances with seasonal cycles and astronomical events that were significant for both agricultural and maritime activities. Religious festivals were timed to coincide with important commercial activities, creating connections between spiritual devotion and economic success. The standardization of religious calendars across different Phoenician cities facilitated coordination of both commercial activities. The temple religious and treasuries that accumulated wealth through and commercial activities served as both religious donations, spiritual institutions, and financial centers that provided banking services and investment opportunities. These treasuries often possessed resources that rivaled or exceeded those of royal governments, making them important factors in political and economic affairs. The management of temple wealth required sophisticated financial skills and administrative capabilities. The religious diplomacy that connected Phoenician cities with foreign powers involved the exchange of religious gifts, participation in foreign festivals, and recognition of foreign deities that facilitated political and commercial relationships. Religious ceremonies often accompanied diplomatic negotiations, while shared religious observances created bonds of mutual obligation and respect. These religious dimensions of diplomacy contributed to the stability and durability of international relationships. The healing traditions that developed within Phoenician religious culture combined spiritual practices with practical medical knowledge acquired through international trade contacts. Temple physicians employed both prayer and herbal remedies to treat various ailments, while religious ceremonies provided psychological support for healing processes. The integration of spiritual and medical approaches to healing created comprehensive healthcare systems that served both religious and practical functions. The agricultural rituals that connected Phoenician religious practices with seasonal cycles and food production involved elaborate ceremonies designed to ensure divine blessing for crops and livestock. These rituals typically involved the sacrifice of first fruits and the performance of ceremonial activities that symbolically renewed the relationship between human communities and divine powers. The agricultural dimensions of Phoenician religion maintained connections to their Canaanite heritage while adapting to colonial environments. The maritime rituals that invoked divine protection for sea voyages and commercial ventures involved elaborate ceremonies conducted before ships departed and after they returned safely. These rituals typically included sacrificial offerings, ceremonial blessings of vessels and crew members, and vows of thanksgiving for successful completion of dangerous journeys. The maritime dimensions of Phoenician religion reflected the central importance of sea travel in their economic and social life. The religious art traditions that developed in Phoenician communities combined theological symbolism with aesthetic innovations that reflected both spiritual devotion and cultural sophistication. Religious artwork included elaborate temple decorations, ceremonial objects, and votive offerings that demonstrated both artistic skill and religious commitment. These artistic traditions influenced religious art throughout the Mediterranean while maintaining distinctively Phoenician characteristics. The prophetic literature that preserved divine revelations and spiritual insights provided guidance for both individual behavior and community policies through recorded prophecies and oracular pronouncements. These texts address both immediate practical concerns and long-term spiritual issues, creating comprehensive resources for religious and moral guidance. The preservation of prophetic literature contributed to the theological sophistication that characterized mature Phoenician religious traditions. Here at Obscure Histories, we have observed that many ancient civilizations developed religious traditions that emphasized territorial deities and exclusive devotional practices. But the Phoenician approach demonstrated remarkable flexibility and inclusiveness that facilitated both spiritual fulfillment and practical success in diverse environments. Their synthetic approach to religion created adaptable spiritual systems that could accommodate changing circumstances while maintaining essential theological principles. The religious law traditions that governed Phoenician communities created comprehensive legal frameworks that addressed both ritual requirements and social obligations through integrated systems of religious and civil legislation. These legal traditions provided guidance for individual behavior and community governance, while maintaining flexibility for adaptation to local conditions and changing circumstances. The religious dimensions of Phoenician law contributed to social stability and moral coherence throughout their civilization. The theological philosophy that undergirded Phoenician religious practices emphasized practical wisdom and adaptive flexibility rather than rigid doctrinal orthodoxy or exclusive devotional requirements. This philosophical approach enabled Phoenician communities to maintain spiritual coherence while accommodating diverse beliefs and practices encountered through their extensive international contacts. The theological sophistication that resulted from this approach influenced religious development throughout the Mediterranean. The religious architecture that characterized major Phoenician temples incorporated design elements from various Mediterranean traditions, while maintaining distinctively Phoenician theological and aesthetic principles. These architectural innovations reflected both spiritual priorities and practical considerations, creating sacred spaces that could accommodate large congregations, while providing appropriate settings for elaborate ceremonial activities. The architectural legacy of Phoenician religious buildings influenced sacred architecture throughout the ancient world. The ceremonial traditions that marked important events in Phoenician religious and social life involved elaborate rituals that combined spiritual observance with community celebration and cultural reinforcement. These ceremonies provided occasions for both individual spiritual experience and collective social bonding, while maintaining connections to theological traditions and cultural identity. The ceremonial sophistication that characterized Phoenician religious life contributed to social cohesion and cultural continuity. The mystical traditions that developed within Phoenician religious culture provided esoteric spiritual experiences for dedicated practitioners, while maintaining connections to broader community religious practices and theological principles. These mystical approaches to spirituality involved specialized techniques for achieving direct divine communication and spiritual enlightenment that complemented more conventional forms of religious observance. The mystical dimensions of Phoenician religion influenced spiritual development throughout the Mediterranean. The religious scholarship that preserved and transmitted Phoenician theological knowledge involved systematic efforts to record, analyze, and interpret spiritual traditions and divine revelations through written texts and oral traditions. Religious scholars maintained libraries of theological literature while conducting research into doctrinal questions and practical religious issues. The scholarly traditions that developed in major Phoenician centers contributed to theological sophistication throughout their civilization. The interfaith dialogue that characterized Phoenician religious practices, efforts to understand and incorporate foreign religious traditions through diplomatic exchanges and cultural interactions dialogue. This approach to religion facilitated peaceful relationships communities with diverse, while enriching Phoenician theological understanding through exposure to alternative spiritual perspectives. The interfaith sophistication that resulted from this approach contributed to religious tolerance and cultural harmony. The ethical systems that emerged from Phoenician religious traditions provided comprehensive moral guidance for both individual behavior and community policies through integrated approaches to spiritual and practical obligations. These ethical frameworks addressed both personal virtue and social justice, while maintaining flexibility for adaptation to diverse circumstances and cultural contexts. The ethical sophistication that characterized Phoenician moral philosophy influenced ethical development throughout the Mediterranean world. The linguistic innovations that revolutionized human communication began with the Phoenician development of the world's first practical alphabetic writing system, a breakthrough that would prove far more significant than any of their commercial or colonial achievements. This revolutionary approach to representing spoken language transformed writing from a complex skill mastered only by professional scribes into an accessible tool that could be learned by ordinary merchants, craftsmen, and citizens throughout the Mediterranean world. The historical context that gave rise to the Phoenician alphabet involved centuries of frustration with the cumbersome writing systems that dominated the ancient Near East during the late Bronze Age. Egyptian hieroglyphics, while magnificent in their artistic complexity, required mastery of hundreds of different symbols representing everything from concrete objects to abstract concepts. Mesopotamian cuneiform, with its wedge-shaped marks impressed into clay tablets, demanded knowledge of thousands of signs that combined pictographic, ideographic, and syllabic elements in bewildering complexity. The practical needs of Phoenician merchants operating across vast distances and dealing with diverse populations created urgent demands for a writing system that could be learned quickly, used efficiently, and adapted easily to different languages. The complex record-keeping requirements of international commerce, combined with the necessity of communicating across linguistic barriers, made existing writing systems inadequate for the expanding scope of Mediterranean trade. The intellectual breakthrough that led to the alphabetic principle involved the recognition that human speech could be broken down into a limited number of basic sound units that could be represented by simple, standardized symbols. Rather than attempting to represent entire words, concepts, or syllables, the Phoenician system focused on the fundamental consonantal sounds that formed the building blocks of spoken language. This analytical approach to language represented a revolutionary advance in linguistic thinking. The technical development of the Phoenician alphabet drew upon earlier experimental scripts that had begun exploring sound-based writing, particularly the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions found in Egyptian mining settlements. These earlier attempts at alphabetic writing provided crucial precedents and partial solutions that Phoenician scribes refined and systematized into a coherent practical writing system. The evolutionary process that produced the mature alphabet involved centuries of gradual refinement and standardization. The structural characteristics that defined the Phoenician alphabet included 22 consonantal symbols that could represent the sound structure of Semitic languages with remarkable efficiency and clarity. Each symbol corresponded to a specific consonantal sound, while vowel sounds were left to be supplied by readers based on their knowledge of the language and context. This consonantal approach proved perfectly adequate for Semitic languages, while providing a foundation that could be adapted for other linguistic families. The visual design of Phoenician letters demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in creating simple, distinctive symbols that could be written quickly and recognized easily by readers with varying levels of literacy. The letter forms were streamlined versions of earlier pictographic symbols, reduced to their essential visual elements while maintaining enough distinctiveness to prevent confusion. The standardized orientation and proportions of letters facilitated consistent writing and reading across different scribes and locations. The pedagogical advantages of the alphabetic system revolutionized education by making literacy accessible to anyone with basic intelligence and motivation, regardless of social class or professional specialization. Unlike the years of intensive training required to master hieroglyphic or cuneiform writing, the Phoenician alphabet could be learned in a matter of weeks or months. This democratization of literacy had profound social and cultural implications throughout the ancient world. The technological applications of alphabetic writing enabled rapid, efficient record-keeping that supported the complex commercial operations characteristic of Phoenician civilization. Merchants could maintain detailed accounts of transactions, inventory, and correspondence without requiring specialized scribal training or expensive writing materials. The simplicity of alphabetic notation made it practical to maintain business records on a scale previously impossible, contributing directly to the sophistication and reliability of Phoenician commercial networks. The cultural transmission of the Phoenician alphabet occurred through the natural channels of Mediterranean commerce as Phoenician merchants established trading relationships with peoples throughout the region. Local populations who observed the practical advantages of alphabetic writing quickly recognized its superiority over their existing communication methods. The adoption process was typically voluntary and gradual, driven by practical benefits rather than cultural imposition. The Greek adaptation of the Phoenician alphabet represented the most significant modification of the original system, with Greek scribes adding vowel symbols to create a writing system capable of representing their Indo-European language more completely. This innovation addressed the limitation of purely consonantal writing for non-Semitic languages, while preserving the essential simplicity and efficiency that made alphabetic writing superior to earlier systems. The Greek modifications established the foundation for all subsequent European alphabetic traditions. The regional variations that developed as different peoples adapted Phoenician letters to their own linguistic needs, created a diverse family of related alphabetic systems throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Each adaptation involved modifications to suit local phonetic requirements while maintaining the basic principle of sound-symbol correspondence that defined alphabetic writing. These regional developments demonstrated both the flexibility and the universality of the alphabetic concept. The standardization processes that maintained consistency within Phoenician alphabetic traditions involved commercial and educational practices that preserved uniform letter forms and spelling conventions across different cities and colonies. Merchant guilds and educational institutions played crucial roles in maintaining these standards while allowing for gradual evolution and improvement. The balance between consistency and adaptability enabled the alphabet to serve diverse needs while maintaining its essential character. The material aspects of alphabetic writing involved innovations in writing surfaces, implements, and techniques that made the new system practical for widespread use. Papyrus, leather, and eventually parchment provided portable writing surfaces that were superior to the clay tablets required for cuneiform or the stone surfaces often used for hieroglyphic inscriptions. Metal and reed pens enabled fluid writing that could produce the curved and angular forms characteristic of alphabetic letters. The economic impact of alphabetic literacy extended far beyond simple communication improvements, creating new possibilities for commercial organization, legal documentation, and cultural preservation that enhance the overall sophistication of Mediterranean civilization. Business partnerships could be documented with precision, legal agreements could be recorded for future reference, and cultural traditions could be preserved in written form for transmission to future generations. The legal applications of alphabetic writing revolutionized ancient jurisprudence by enabling the creation of comprehensive legal codes, detailed contracts, and permanent records of judicial proceedings. The accessibility of alphabetic notation meant that legal documents could be created and maintained without dependence on specialized scribal classes, while the clarity and precision of alphabetic text reduced ambiguities and disputes. These legal innovations contributed to more sophisticated and equitable systems of justice throughout the Mediterranean. The literary development that followed the adoption of alphabetic writing created new possibilities for cultural expression and intellectual development that had been impossible with earlier writing systems. The ease of alphabetic composition enabled ordinary people to create written records of their experiences, beliefs, and creative expressions. This literary democratization contributed to cultural richness and intellectual diversity throughout the ancient world. The religious applications of alphabetic writing facilitated the preservation and transmission of theological traditions, ritual instructions, and spiritual literature that had previously relied on oral transmission. Religious communities could maintain accurate records of their beliefs and practices, while enabling broader participation in literate religious culture. The accessibility of alphabetic writing contributed to religious development and spiritual sophistication throughout the Mediterranean region. The administrative capabilities enabled by alphabetic literacy transformed government operations throughout the ancient world by providing efficient means for record-keeping, communication, and policy implementation. Official correspondence could be conducted more rapidly and accurately, while administrative records could be maintained with unprecedented detail and organization. These governmental improvements contributed to more effective and responsive political institutions. The educational systems that developed to teach alphabetic literacy created new institutions and methods that made learning accessible to broader segments of society than had been possible with earlier writing systems. Schools could teach reading and writing to larger numbers of students with less specialized instruction, while educational materials could be produced and distributed more economically. These educational innovations contributed to intellectual development throughout the Mediterranean world. The scientific applications of alphabetic writing enabled more systematic recording and transmission of technical knowledge, observational data, and theoretical developments that advanced human understanding of natural phenomena. Scientists and technicians could maintain detailed records of their experiments and observations, while technical manuals could preserve and transmit specialized knowledge. These scientific applications contributed to technological advancement throughout the ancient world. The historical documentation enabled by alphabetic literacy created unprecedented opportunities for recording and preserving information about past events, cultural developments, and social changes. Historians could maintain detailed chronological records, while ordinary people could contribute to historical understanding through personal accounts and local records. This historical documentation has provided modern scholars with invaluable insights into ancient Mediterranean civilizations. The diplomatic applications of alphabetic writing facilitated international communication and negotiation by providing efficient means for conducting correspondence between different political entities. Treaties, commercial agreements, and diplomatic protocols could be recorded with precision and clarity, while ongoing correspondence could maintain relationships across vast distances. These diplomatic capabilities contributed to international stability and cooperation throughout the Mediterranean region. The intellectual revolution triggered by widespread alphabetic literacy created new possibilities for abstract thinking, logical analysis, and systematic investigation that transformed human cognitive capabilities. The ease of writing and reading alphabetic text enabled more complex forms of reasoning and argumentation, while the permanence of written records facilitated cumulative intellectual development. These cognitive enhancements contributed to philosophical and scientific advancement throughout the ancient world. The social mobility facilitated by alphabetic literacy broke down traditional barriers between social classes by providing ordinary people with access to knowledge and skills that had previously been restricted to elite scribal groups. Merchants, craftsmen, and farmers could acquire literacy and use it to advance their economic and social positions. This democratization of knowledge contributed to more dynamic and flexible social structures throughout the Mediterranean. The cultural preservation enabled by alphabetic writing allowed societies to maintain detailed records of their traditions, customs, and historical experiences for transmission to future generations. Folk tales, religious practices, and cultural knowledge that had previously relied on oral transmission could be preserved in written form with greater accuracy and permanence. This cultural preservation contributed to the continuity and richness of Mediterranean civilizations. The technological transfer facilitated by alphabetic literacy enabled the rapid spread of innovations, techniques, and knowledge throughout the Mediterranean region and beyond. Technical manuals, instructional texts, and correspondence could transmit complex information across vast distances and cultural boundaries. This technological diffusion accelerated the pace of innovation and development throughout the ancient world. The commercial applications of alphabetic writing extended far beyond simple record-keeping to enable sophisticated financial instruments, detailed contracts, and complex business organizations that revolutionized ancient commerce. Letters of credit, partnership agreements, and commercial correspondence could be conducted with unprecedented precision and reliability. These commercial innovations contributed to the economic integration and prosperity that characterized the mature Mediterranean world. Here at Obscure Histories, we have examined many technological innovations that transformed ancient civilizations, but the development of alphabetic writing stands apart as perhaps the most revolutionary advance in human communication technology. The Phoenician achievement in creating the first practical alphabet provided the foundation for virtually all subsequent developments in written communication and continues to influence our modern world in countless ways. The linguistic analysis that underlies alphabetic writing involved sophisticated understanding of phonetic principles and sound symbol relationships that represented remarkable advances in linguistic thinking. Phoenician scholars demonstrated remarkable insight into the structure of human language by recognizing that complex speech could be broken down into discrete sound units that could be represented systematically. This analytical approach to language provided foundations for subsequent developments in linguistics and communication theory. The pedagogical methods that developed for teaching alphabetic literacy created educational approaches that remain influential in modern instructional practices. The systematic progression from individual letter recognition through syllable formation to complete word reading provided efficient learning sequences that could be adapted for different languages and educational contexts. These pedagogical innovations contributed to educational development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The psychological impact of widespread literacy transformed human consciousness by providing new ways of organizing thoughts, preserving memories, and conducting abstract reasoning. The ability to externalize and manipulate ideas through written text enabled more complex forms of thinking and analysis than had been possible through purely oral cultures. These cognitive transformations contributed to intellectual advancement throughout the Mediterranean and established foundations for subsequent cultural development. The standardization processes that maintained alphabetic consistency across different regions and time periods involved complex negotiations between practical utility and traditional forms that created stable yet adaptable writing systems. Commercial needs demanded consistency that would enable communication across cultural boundaries, while local preferences required flexibility that could accommodate regional variations. The balance achieved between these competing demands enabled alphabetic writing to serve diverse needs while maintaining essential coherence. The calligraphic traditions that developed around alphabetic writing created artistic expressions that combined functional communication with aesthetic beauty through sophisticated approaches to letter design and text layout. Professional scribes developed distinctive styles that enhance the visual appeal of written text while maintaining clarity and legibility. These artistic dimensions of alphabetic writing contributed to cultural development and aesthetic sophistication throughout the ancient world. The manuscript production techniques that developed to meet the growing demand for alphabetic texts created new industries and economic opportunities throughout the Mediterranean region. Specialized workshops employed scribes, illustrators, and bookbinders who produce both utilitarian documents and luxury texts for various markets. These production innovations contributed to economic development while making written materials more widely available. The library systems that developed to organize and preserve alphabetic texts created new institutions for knowledge storage and retrieval that served both practical and cultural functions. These libraries employed cataloging systems, storage techniques, and retrieval methods that enabled efficient access to accumulated knowledge. The library innovations developed in major Phoenician centers influenced intellectual institutions throughout the Mediterranean world. The translation practices that developed to facilitate communication between different linguistic communities created systematic approaches to cross-cultural communication that enhanced international understanding and cooperation. Professional translators developed techniques for converting concepts and expressions between different languages, while preserving essential meanings and cultural nuances. These translation capabilities contributed to cultural exchange and intellectual development throughout the ancient world. The linguistic influence of Phoenician alphabetic innovations extended far beyond the Mediterranean region to affect writing systems throughout Africa, Asia, and eventually the Americas through the complex processes of cultural transmission and adaptation. The fundamental principles of sound symbol correspondence that defined alphabetic writing proved applicable to diverse linguistic families and cultural contexts. This global influence of Phoenician innovations continues to shape human communication throughout the modern world. The academic study of alphabetic development has revealed the complex historical processes through which the Phoenician innovations spread, evolved, and adapted to meet diverse cultural and linguistic needs throughout the ancient world and beyond. Modern scholarship has traced the genealogical relationships between different alphabetic traditions, while identifying the specific innovations and adaptations that enabled alphabetic writing to achieve its dominant position in human communication systems. The technological heritage of Phoenician alphabetic innovations provides foundations for virtually all modern writing systems, computer keyboards, and digital communication technologies that shape contemporary life. The basic principles of sound symbol correspondence, standardized letter forms, and systematic organization that characterize the original Phoenician alphabet continue to influence everything from elementary education to advanced information processing systems. The cultural legacy of Phoenician literacy extends throughout modern civilization in ways that are often invisible but nonetheless fundamental to contemporary intellectual life. The democratic implications of accessible writing, the educational possibilities created by efficient notation systems, and the cultural preservation enabled by written records all trace their origins to the revolutionary innovations pioneered by Phoenician scribes over 3 millennia ago. The environmental challenges that confronted Phoenician civilization during its later periods revealed both the resilience and the vulnerabilities inherent in their maritime commercial system. Climate fluctuations that affected agricultural production throughout the Mediterranean created cascading effects that disrupted established trade patterns and forced adaptations in commercial strategies. The sophisticated networks that had enabled Phoenician prosperity also transmitted economic shocks rapidly across vast distances, making their civilization vulnerable to disruptions originating far from their homeland. The drought cycles that periodically afflicted the eastern Mediterranean had particularly severe impacts on Phoenician cities due to their limited agricultural base and dependence on imported food supplies. When regional harvests failed, the increased demand for grain from distant sources strained their commercial networks while driving up prices throughout their trading system. These environmental pressures forced innovations in storage techniques, supply chain management, and risk distribution that demonstrated remarkable adaptability, but also revealed the precarious foundations of their prosperity. The deforestation that gradually reduced the famous cedar forests of Lebanon created long-term challenges for Phoenician shipbuilding and construction industries. The systematic harvesting of these valuable timber resources over centuries eventually outpaced natural regeneration, forcing Phoenician craftsmen to seek alternative materials and modify their construction techniques. This environmental degradation had profound implications for both their naval capabilities and their export economy, contributing to gradual shifts in their competitive advantages. The soil erosion that resulted from intensive agricultural practices on the steep hillsides surrounding Phoenician cities reduced the productivity of their limited farmlands while creating additional dependence on imported food supplies. The terracing systems that had extended cultivation beyond the narrow coastal plains required constant maintenance and periodic reconstruction as heavy rains washed away accumulated soil. These environmental challenges intensified the pressure to maintain profitable trading relationships that could finance food imports. The harbour siltation that gradually affected major Phoenician ports created ongoing challenges for maintaining the deep water access essential to their maritime economy. Rivers carrying sediment from deforested watersheds deposited increasing amounts of material in coastal waters, requiring constant dredging operations to maintain navigable channels. The cost and complexity of these harbour maintenance projects strained municipal resources while threatening the commercial viability of affected ports. The climate variations that altered seasonal weather patterns throughout the Mediterranean disrupted the carefully synchronized timing that governed Phoenician maritime operations. Changes in wind patterns, storm frequencies, and seasonal temperatures forced adjustments in sailing schedules and route selection that affected the efficiency and profitability of trading expeditions. These climatic adaptations required accumulated knowledge and flexible planning capabilities that demonstrated the sophistication of Phoenician maritime culture. The resource depletion that affected various raw materials essential to Phoenician manufacturing created pressures for territorial expansion and alternative supply development. The exhaustion of easily accessible mineral deposits forced exploration of more distant and difficult sources, while competition with other civilizations for scarce resources intensified political and military tensions. These resource challenges contributed to the territorial ambitions that would eventually bring Phoenician cities into conflict with expanding powers. The population pressures that developed in successful Phoenician cities created social tensions and resource strains that required careful management to maintain stability and prosperity. Urban growth beyond the carrying capacity of local food production intensified dependence on imports while creating sanitation and housing challenges that threatened public health. These demographic pressures provided motivation for colonial expansion while creating internal stresses that could undermine social cohesion. The technological obsolescence that gradually affected some traditional Phoenician industries created challenges for maintaining their competitive advantages in changing markets. Ironworking techniques that spread throughout the Mediterranean reduced demand for bronze products, while improvements in glass production elsewhere challenged Phoenician dominance in luxury manufacturing. These technological changes required continuous innovation and adaptation to maintain their position in evolving markets. The political instability that periodically affected the Eastern Mediterranean created disruptions in the peaceful commercial environment that Phoenician civilization required for optimal functioning. Military conflicts between major powers could close trade routes, destroy commercial infrastructure, and disrupt the diplomatic relationships that facilitated international commerce. These political challenges required sophisticated diplomatic strategies and flexible commercial arrangements that could adapt to changing circumstances. The military pressures that developed as Phoenician wealth attracted the attention of expanding empires, created unprecedented challenges for cities that had traditionally relied on diplomacy and commercial relationships rather than military force for security. The rise of aggressive powers that viewed conquest and tribute extraction as preferable to mutually beneficial trade relationships threatened the fundamental assumptions upon which Phoenician civilization was based. The cultural assimilation pressures that accompanied political subjugation by foreign powers created challenges for maintaining distinctive Phoenician identity while adapting to new political realities. Communities that had developed under conditions of political independence themselves, forced to accommodate, and cultural autonomy found foreign rulers, legal systems, and cultural practices that could conflict with traditional values and customs. The economic disruption caused by changing political conditions affected the commercial networks that provided the foundation for Phoenician prosperity and cultural coherence. Trade routes that had operated efficiently for centuries could be disrupted by political conflicts, while commercial relationships that had developed over generations could be severed by changing political alignments. These economic disruptions created cascading effects throughout Phoenician society and culture. The technological competition that emerged as other civilizations developed their own maritime capabilities challenged Phoenician dominance in Mediterranean commerce and naval operations. The spread of shipbuilding techniques, navigation knowledge, and commercial practices reduced the technological advantages that had provided foundations for Phoenician success. This technological diffusion created more competitive commercial environments while reducing the premium that could be charged for Phoenician expertise. The monetary innovations that developed in response to the complexities of Mediterranean commerce created new financial instruments and exchange mechanisms that enhanced the efficiency of international trade. Phoenician merchants pioneered the use of standardized weights and measures, credit arrangements, and currency exchange systems that facilitated commercial transactions across cultural and political boundaries. These financial innovations contributed to the economic integration that characterized the mature Mediterranean world. The banking institutions that evolved from temple treasuries and merchant partnerships created sophisticated financial services that supported both local economic development and international commerce. These institutions provided credit facilities, investment opportunities, and currency exchange services that enabled more ambitious commercial ventures while distributing risks among multiple participants. The banking innovations developed in major Phoenician centers influenced financial practices throughout the Mediterranean region. The insurance concepts that emerged from the practical needs of maritime commerce created systematic approaches to risk management that enabled more ambitious trading ventures while providing protection against the substantial hazards inherent in ancient sea travel. Shared risk arrangements, cargo insurance, and crew protection schemes distributed potential losses among multiple parties, while encouraging investment in increasingly distant and dangerous commercial expeditions. The accounting methods that developed to track complex commercial operations created systematic approaches to record keeping and financial analysis that enhanced the efficiency and profitability of trading ventures. Double entry bookkeeping, inventory management, and profit calculation techniques enabled merchants to monitor their operations with unprecedented precision while identifying opportunities for improvement and expansion. The legal frameworks that governed commercial relationships created comprehensive systems of contract law, dispute resolution, and commercial regulation that facilitated international trade while protecting the interests of various participants. These legal innovations addressed everything from partnership agreements and employment contracts to bankruptcy procedures and international arbitration, creating predictable commercial environments that encouraged long-term investment and relationship building. The diplomatic protocols that facilitated international commerce created systematic approaches to negotiation, treaty-making, and conflict resolution that maintained the peaceful conditions necessary for profitable trading relationships. Phoenician diplomats developed sophisticated techniques for managing complex international relationships, while protecting their cities' commercial interests and maintaining their political independence. The cultural integration strategies that enabled Phoenician communities to function effectively in diverse international environments created adaptive approaches to cross-cultural communication and relationship building. These strategies balanced the maintenance of distinctive Phoenician identity with the flexibility necessary for successful operation in foreign markets and multicultural colonial settings. The educational institutions that supported Phoenician commercial and cultural activities created systematic approaches to knowledge transmission and skill development that prepared individuals for the complex challenges of international commerce and colonial administration. These institutions provided training in languages, mathematics, law, and technical skills, while fostering the cultural values and social networks that maintained Phoenician civilization across vast distances. The technological transfer mechanisms that connected Phoenician communities with developments throughout the Mediterranean created systematic approaches to innovation adoption and adaptation that maintained their competitive advantages while contributing to broader technological advancement. These mechanisms facilitated the rapid spread of improvements while enabling local adaptations that met specific regional needs and conditions. The quality control systems that maintained the reputation of Phoenician goods in international markets created comprehensive approaches to production standards and commercial ethics that protected both producers and consumers from fraud and substandard products. These systems included guild regulations, inspection procedures, and trademark protections that maintained the premium pricing that Phoenician products could command in competitive markets. The research and development activities that supported Phoenician technological and commercial innovation created systematic approaches to experimentation and improvement that maintained their competitive advantages while contributing to broader advances in human knowledge and capability. These activities involved both practical problem-solving and theoretical investigation that enhanced their understanding of natural phenomena and technical processes. The information networks that connected Phoenician communities across the Mediterranean created comprehensive systems for sharing knowledge, coordinating activities, and responding to changing conditions that enhanced the effectiveness of their commercial and political strategies. These networks facilitated rapid communication while enabling coordinated responses to challenges and opportunities that affected multiple communities simultaneously. The strategic planning processes that guided Phoenician commercial and political development created systematic approaches to long-term thinking and resource allocation that balanced immediate needs with future opportunities and challenges. These planning processes considered both internal capabilities and external conditions, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for adaptation to changing circumstances. Here at Obscure Histories, we have observed that many ancient civilizations achieved temporary prominence through favorable circumstances or superior military capabilities, only to decline when those advantages disappeared or were overcome by competitors. The Phoenician approach of building systematic capabilities and adaptive institutions created more durable foundations for long-term success that could survive temporary setbacks and changing conditions. The Phoenicians emerged from the shadows of the Bronze Age collapse, not as conquerors wielding bronze swords or builders of monumental architecture, but as innovators who understood that true power lay in connection, adaptation, and the patient accumulation of knowledge across generations. Their alphabet democratized human communication. Their ships carried not just goods but ideas across vast oceans, and their colonies became crucibles where cultures merged and evolved in ways that continue to shape our modern world. While empires built on military might crumbled when their armies faltered, the Phoenician legacy endured through the very letters we use to tell their story, a testament to the profound truth that ideas, once released into the world, prove far more durable than bronze or stone. As we trace the remarkable journey of Phoenician civilization through nearly a millennium of Mediterranean dominance, we find ourselves confronting a profound paradox of historical memory. The very people who gave us the foundation of our modern alphabet, who pioneered the principles of international commerce, and who established the first truly global trading networks, remain frustratingly elusive in popular consciousness. Their cities may have fallen to conquering armies. Their political independence may have been extinguished by expanding empires. But their innovations became so fundamental to human civilization that we often forget to acknowledge their origins. The Phoenicians succeeded where countless military empires failed precisely because they understood that lasting influence comes not from the ability to impose one's will through force, but from the capacity to create systems so valuable that others voluntarily adopt and preserve them. Their alphabet spread not because Phoenician armies carried it to distant lands, but because merchants, scholars, and ordinary people recognized its superiority over existing writing systems. Their commercial practices endured not because of political compulsion, but because they solved real problems and created genuine prosperity for all participants. Perhaps most remarkably, the Phoenician achievement demonstrates that civilization's greatest advances often come from those who embrace rather than resist the complexities of our interconnected world. While other cultures sought purity and isolation, the Phoenicians thrived on diversity, adaptation, and the creative tensions that emerge when different peoples encounter one another as equals in the pursuit of mutual benefit. Today, as we navigate our own era of global interconnection and cultural exchange, the Phoenician example offers both inspiration and instruction. They remind us that the most enduring legacies are not monuments to individual glory, but contributions to the common heritage of humanity. In every letter we write, every contract we sign, and every peaceful exchange between peoples of different cultures, we participate in the continuing story of Phoenician innovation. Their ships may have vanished beneath Mediterranean waves, but their vision of a world connected by commerce, communication, and mutual understanding sails on in the currents of human progress.